Have you ever looked at an old photograph, one of the stiff ones? The kind where nobody is smiling because nobody was allowed to move and felt, for just a second, that one of the faces in it was looking back at you a half-beat later than the rest? Not moving. Photographs do not move, but arriving, as though the rest of the people in the frame had been standing there since the shutter opened, and that one had only just gotten there and was still deciding how to hold its face. If you have ever felt that, then you already understand the thing I am going to spend the next 3 hours telling you about. And you already understand why a family in Braddock County, West Virginia, burned nearly everything they owned in the spring of 1893 and left a good 41 acres of cleared bottomland to go back to brush, and never once, in the following 79 years, told anybody why. A note before we go down into it. If this is the kind of case you would want 10 of, instead of one told slow, told whole, told in a voice made for the last hour before sleep, there is a collection. It is called The Thin Ground. 12 cases out of 12 counties across 4 states, 1851 through 1968, 10 hours, end to end. Every one of them a place where the ground stopped behaving and the paperwork afterward used the wrong word for it. The link is down in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. And before I go on, tell me where you are watching this from. Put it in the comments. I want to see how far this one reaches tonight. And if you have not already, hit subscribe. It is free, and it means the next one finds you. Now then, the county is Braddock County, West Virginia. If you go looking for it on a modern map, you will find it. But you will not find much of what I am about to describe, because the roads moved in 1938 and the water moved in 1954, and between the two of them, a good part of the Eastern District went quiet and stayed quiet. In 1892, Braddock County held 4,109 people, according to the assessor's roll for that year. Most of them lived along the two forks of the Little Sang River, which comes down out of the high ground in a series of long, slow bends and runs shallow enough in August that a child can walk the length of it and never get wet above the knee. There was a courthouse at Ambler, a town of 600, and there were 4 post offices in the county, and one of them was a room in the back of a store at a settlement called Stillwater Fork. Stillwater Fork is where this happened. It was not a town. It never was. In the survey book, it is listed as a locality, which is the word the state used for a place where enough people lived close enough together to justify a mail sack but not a mayor. 11 households in 1892, a store, a schoolhouse that ran 3 months a year, a church that shared a preacher with 2 other congregations and got him 1 Sunday in 3, corn, hogs, a little tobacco, timber for anybody willing to take the risk of getting it down to the river. And above the settlement, on the north face of a rise the locals called Anders Knob, there was a farm of 41 acres that had belonged to a man named Absalom Nettle since 1881. I want to be careful here, because this is a case where the careless version has been told a great many times and gotten almost everything wrong. You may have heard some of it. There is a version that goes around where the twins are found dead. There is a version where there are 3 of them. There is a version where the photograph was taken after they were found, which is exactly backward, and getting it backward removes the one detail that makes the whole thing sit wrong in your chest at 2 in the morning. So let me lay it out straight, in the order it actually happened, from the records that actually exist. The Nettle family, in the summer of 1892, was 6 people. Absalom Nettle was 39 years old. He was born in Braddock County, and his father had been born in Braddock County, and the deed to the 41 acres had a corner of it torn off in 1863 that nobody had ever bothered to reconstruct. He was not a big man. The one description we have of him from a deposition taken about a fence line in 1888 calls him spare and quiet and slow to close a bargain, which in that county and that decade was very nearly a compliment. He could read. He kept a farm ledger, and that ledger survives, and I am going to be reading you out of it later, because there is a page in it that has been photographed for a state archive and has been sitting in a drawer in Charleston for the better part of 50 years with almost nobody looking at it. His wife was Hester Nettle, born Hester Rue Cawood, 36 years old in that summer. She came from the far side of the county, from a family that had been in the milling business before the war and out of it after. She is the one who wrote the letters. 9 of them survive. They are the closest thing this case has to a witness. Their oldest child was Tolliver Nettle, 14. Everybody called him Toll. He is the one who gets out. I will tell you that now, because I do not want you sitting there for 3 hours wondering whether anybody in this story lives, and because the shape of the thing is not about who lives. It is about what living costs and what he was still doing about it in a boarding house in Ohio in 1966, at 88 years old, in front of a night nurse who wrote it down. Then there were the twins. Verity Nettle and Corinne Nettle were born on the 11th of March, 1881, which made them 11 years old in the summer this happened. They were identical. Every single source we have says so, in the way people said it then that you could not tell them apart, that their own mother sorted them by a habit rather than a face. And that is a detail worth holding on to, so hold on to it. Their own mother sorted them by a habit rather than a face. Verity was the one who chewed the inside of her cheek when she was thinking. Corinne was the one who could not stand still. She rocked her weight from heel to heel, a slow sway, all day long, standing at the washpot, standing at the fence, standing in church. And there was a 6th child, and she is the reason the rest of this happened the way it did. Ruth Ann Nettle was born in 1889 and died on the 2nd of February, 1891, of what the county recorded as scarlet fever, at the age of 1 year and 10 months. She was buried in the Stillwater Fork churchyard, under a stone that her father cut himself badly, because a bought stone was $4 and a cut one was an afternoon. I want you to know 3 things about Ruth Ann Nettle, because in about an hour they are going to matter more than anything else in this story. The first is that she hummed while she ate. Not a tune. Just a low, flat, contented hum, one note over and over, the whole time there was food in front of her. Hester wrote about it in a letter to her sister in 1890, and complained about it the way you complain about something you already know you are going to miss. The second is that she could not say her brother's name. She could not get the second syllable of Tolliver, so she called him Toll. Just that, both syllables the same weight, Toll. And the third is that she was frightened of the pump handle. The Nettles had a hand pump on a shallow well about 9 steps off the kitchen door, and the handle had a bad joint in it, and when it came down, it made a sound like a door being unlatched somewhere far off. Ruth Ann hated it. She would not be in the yard when anybody was pumping. She would go inside and put her face in her mother's apron until it stopped. Hum. Toll. The pump handle. Remember those 3. I am not being cute with you. Those 3 things are the entire mechanism of what happens in Nettle Hollow, and the reason a photographer's plate that has been sitting in an archive since 1931 still makes people who work with old glass go strangely quiet when you ask them about it. Now, the photograph. The photographer's name was Alden Mercer Voss. He was 51 years old in 1892. He was from Zanesville, Ohio, and he had been making his living for 19 years by loading a wagon with a camera, a tent, a case of dry plates, and about 60 pounds of chemistry, and driving it up into places where nobody had ever had their likeness taken. This was a real trade, and there were hundreds of men doing it. You went up a river valley in the summer. You charged between 50 cents and $1.50 a plate depending on how far you had come and how much the family wanted it. You took the plates back to a town where you had a darkroom arrangement, and you mailed the prints out in the fall. Some of them were good at it. Voss, based on the work of his that survives, was better than good. He had an eye for the light coming off a whitewashed wall, and he did not crowd his subjects the way a lot of the traveling men did. He came into Braddock County in the last week of July, 1892, working up the Little Sang from the south, and he reached Stillwater Fork on the 8th of August. We know the date because Voss kept a plate log. That is the second document I am going to be reading you from tonight, and it is, for my money, the strangest object in this entire case, stranger than the letters, stranger even than the journal in the church cellar. And I will get to why, but not yet. Not for a while yet. There is a thing in the back of that log that I want you to have the rest of the story before you hear. For now, all you need to know is that on the 8th of August, 1892, Alden Voss drove a wagon up a rutted grade on the north face of Anders Knob and stopped in the yard of a farm belonging to a family named Nettle and asked whether they wanted their likenesses made. And Absalom Nettle, who had buried a daughter 18 months earlier without ever having had a picture made of her, said yes before his wife could get out to the porch. He paid $2.25 for 3 plates. That is the figure in the log, and it is a lot of money that was 3 days of hired labor in Braddock County in 1892. He paid it because he had learned the hard way in February of 1891 what it costs you for the rest of your life to have no picture of somebody. 3 plates. The first was the whole family on the porch. Absalom seated, Hester standing at his shoulder, Toll behind them, the twins on the step below, one on either side. The second was the twins alone, standing at the yard fence, with the pasture and the tree line behind them. The third I am going to come back to. Voss made all 3 between about 2 and 4 in the afternoon on the 8th of August, in flat, overcast light, which is why the plates are as good as they are. He packed up, took a meal, slept in the barn at the invitation of Absalom Nettle, and left the next morning going north. He did not come back. There is no evidence he ever thought about the Nettle family again until the prints came up in the developing in a rented room in Parkersburg in the 3rd week of November, and then he wrote a letter. And that letter is why any of this is known at all, but I am getting ahead of myself, and this is not a story to get ahead of. This is a story that has to be walked into at the speed the people in it walked into it, which was slow and reasonable, and with perfectly good explanations for everything, right up until there were not any. So let us go back to the ground. Nettle Hollow, and I should say plainly that it was not called Nettle Hollow because the family lived there. The family was named Nettle, and the hollow was named Nettle, and as far as anybody in 1892 could tell, those 2 facts had nothing to do with each other, which is either a coincidence or the single most disturbing sentence in this whole account, depending on how you feel by the end of it. The hollow ran back off the northeast corner of the farm. It was not large. From the fence line to the head of it was, by the survey of 1912, about 1,100 yards, call it 2/3 of a mile. It was a narrow cut between 2 low ridges with a wet weather branch running down the middle of it, the kind of place that is full of water in March and dry as a bone by August. There was no reason for anybody to be afraid of it. That is what I want you to understand about the geography. It was not a gorge. It was not a cave. It was not a place with a sheer drop or a bad ford or a history of bear. It was a shallow, pleasant, wooded draw of the sort you could walk end to end in 20 minutes, and the Nettle children had been in and out of it their entire lives. And yet, the 11 households at Stillwater Fork did not run stock in it, not one. In a settlement where every scrap of grazing was argued over, where fence lines went into court over 11 feet, there was a 2/3 of a mile draw with a water source that nobody put a single hog into for at least 40 years before 1892. Absalom Nettle owned the lower half of it outright and never cut a stick of timber out of it. In a decade when he was hauling white oak off the far ridge and floating it down to Ambler for cash money. Nobody ever wrote down why, not until later. That is the shape of it in the records. An absence, a hole in the ordinary business of a place, going back further than anybody living could account for. Which brings me to the wagon driver. His name was Ephraim Sizemore, though nobody in Braddock County ever called him that. He was Dunk Sizemore, and he had been Dunk since he was 9 years old and fell through the ice on the Little Sang in front of the whole school, and in 1892 he was 67, and he kept the store at Stillwater Fork. The store was one room and a lean-to. He sold salt, coffee, coal oil, nails, thread, powder, shot, calico by the yard, and this matters in a small way. Later he sold matches by the box at a nickel, and he wrote down every box he sold, because matches were the one thing people stole. Dunk Sizemore is the man who told Nettle the 3 rules, and I want to be precise about when, because the timing is the whole point of it. He did not tell him in the spring. He did not tell him when they moved onto the place, because they had always been on the place. He told him on the 17th of August, 1892, 9 days after the photographer came through, and he told him because of what Toll said when he walked in. We know about this conversation because Nettle described it, in detail, in 1934 to a man named Hollis Reeder Pitt, who was collecting folk material for a state project, and who took down about 6,000 words from Toll over 2 afternoons in a kitchen in Dayton, Ohio. That transcript exists. It is in the same collection as the plates. It is typed on onion skin with the carbon still attached, and there are 2 words in it that were struck through by hand, and I will come back to those 2 words much later tonight, because I do not think Hollis Pitt struck them through. I think Nettle did, after he read it. But here is the 17th of August, in Toll's own account of it, 42 years afterward. He walked the 2.5 miles down to Stillwater Fork to buy salt and a box of matches. He had been sent for salt. The matches were his own idea, and he was 14, and he had 4 cents of his own, and he bought them because for the last 3 nights he had been getting up to check the lamp. Dunk Sizemore weighed out the salt and took the 4 cents for the matches, and then he did not push the box across the counter. He kept his hand on it, and he said, "Tolliver, what do you want matches for?" Toll said something about the lamp going low, and Dunk Sizemore said, "Going low or going out?" And Toll said, and he told Hollis Pitt in 1934 that he remembered being ashamed of saying it because it sounded like a small child's complaint. He said, "Both lamps go low at the same time, and there is no draft. Now I want you to sit with that, because it is the first genuinely wrong thing in this case, and it is almost nothing. 2 lamps in a room, different lamps, different wicks, different amounts of oil, one on the table and one on the shelf by the door. And every night for 3 nights, at some point after full dark, both of them dropped their flame at the same instant, down to about 1/3, and held there, and came back up together. No wind, no door open, no draft in a cabin the boy had slept in his entire life, and whose every draft he knew the way you know the sounds of your own stairs. Dunk Sizemore, according to Toll, took his hand off the box of matches and set both his hands flat on the counter and stood there a while. Then he said, "Is your mother well?" Toll said she was. Dunk said, "Are the girls well?" And Toll said, and this is the line that turns the whole story, and he said it without knowing he was saying anything at all. Toll said, "They are well. Verity has quit chewing her cheek." And Dunk Sizemore said nothing for long enough that the boy started to sweat. Then he came around the end of the counter, and he shut the store door, in the middle of the day, in August, and he said, 3 things, and after the 3 I will not speak of it again. not to you, not to your father, not to anybody, because I have got my own nights to get through, and I am too old to take on somebody else's. Do you hear me?" Toll said he heard him. "1," Dunk Sizemore said. "Do not answer to your name if the voice comes from the tree line, not from the hollow, not from the fence, not from anywhere out past the yard. If somebody wants you, they can come into the yard and want you. Anything that stops at the edge of the trees and calls you is not somebody. 2. Do not let 2 lamps burn in the same room after dark. 1 lamp, always 1. If your mother wants 2, you put 1 out yourself and you take the whipping." And Toll asked why. Because he was 14. And Dunk Sizemore said the only thing that anybody in this entire case ever said that comes close to an explanation, and he said it fast, like a man getting rid of something. Because 2 of a thing in the dark is an invitation, and that ground back of your place does not need any more invitations than it has already got. 3, he said, if you look out and see something of yours standing in the yard, a coat, a bucket, a shoe, anything of yours that you know good and well, you left somewhere else, you leave it be until sunup. You do not go out and get it. Not in daylight either, if it is still there. You wait for the second sunup. If it is still there after 2 sunrises, it is only a bucket. And then he opened the store door and pushed the matches across the counter and said, "Tell your mother I said the salt is a nickel less than last month." And he never spoke of it again in his life, which is documented, because in 1904, a lawyer for a title company asked him directly about the Nettle place in a deposition, and Dunk Sizemore, then 79 years old, said, "And I am reading it exactly. I have nothing to say concerning that ground." 3 rules. Do not answer to your name from the tree line. Never 2 lamps. Do not fetch what is standing in the yard. I want to point out something about those rules that people miss. They are not rules about a monster. Nobody in Braddock County in 1892 seems to have believed there was a creature in Nettle Hollow. No bear thing, no man in the trees, none of the shapes we would reach for now. The rules are about arithmetic. Do not be answered. Do not be doubled. Do not go to the thing that is standing where a thing should not be. Hold that thought. It comes back with teeth. Now let me take you back to the 8th of August, because I skipped over 4 hours of that day, and those 4 hours are where this starts. Alden Voss made the 3 plates in the afternoon, and then he stayed for supper and slept in the barn. And in the letter he wrote in November, the letter I mentioned, the one that is the reason any of this survives, he described that evening in some detail, because by November he had reason to go back over it very carefully in his mind. He said the family was pleasant. He said the boy helped him with the plate box without being asked. He said the mother apologized twice for the supper, which was cornbread and beans and a little bacon, and that it was better than what he had eaten in Ambler for 40 cents. And he said that at some point after the meal, sitting on the porch in that long blue hour that August gives you in the mountains, he noticed the sound, not a sound. The absence of one. He wrote that he had been sleeping in barns and fields up that river for 11 weeks, and that he had gotten so used to the whip-poor-wills that he had stopped hearing them, the way you stop hearing a clock. And that evening, on the Nettle porch, at about the time the light went out of the sky, they stopped. All of them. At once. He said it was like a hand had been laid over the whole ridge. And he said, and this is the part that made me sit up, the first time I read it, he said, he mentioned it, casually, the way a guest mentions weather. He said, "The birds have gone quiet." And Absalom Nettle said, without looking up, "They do that." And Hester Nettle stood up and went inside and did not come back out. Voss slept in the barn. He wrote that he slept badly, and that he woke twice, and that the second time he woke, he lay there for a while trying to work out what had woken him, and decided it was the horses, because the horses were standing up in the dark facing the same direction, which was northeast. Northeast is the hollow. He left at first light. He wrote that Absalom Nettle walked out to the wagon and shook his hand and thanked him, and that the two girls came out on the porch in their nightdresses to watch him go, and that he waved at them, and that one of them waved back. One of them, he put it in the letter that way, and I have gone back and forth for a long time about whether he meant anything by it in November when he wrote it, or whether he was simply being exact because he was a careful man, and by then he had learned that being exact about this family mattered. I lean toward exact. Voss was a technician. His plate log has the exposure times to the second. Either way, one of them waved back. Now, what happened over the next 6 weeks is the slow part, and I am going to give it to you slowly, because the slowness is the horror here. There is no night in September 1892 where anything comes through a wall. There is only a family getting quietly, reasonably, one small degree at a time, further from ordinary, with every single step explainable on its own. The letters are how we know. Hester Nettle wrote to her older sister, Permelia Kaywood Boyer, who had married out of the county and lived at Cumberland, Maryland, and who kept everything she was ever sent. 9 letters, between the 12th of August and the 14th of October, 1892. Permelia Boyer's granddaughter donated them in 1951. The first one, the 12th of August, is a completely normal letter. Weather, hogs, the price of coffee, a man named Chastain who was suing somebody over a road, 2 lines about the photographer coming, and pride showing through the way it does when somebody is trying not to show it. She says, Absalom paid too much, and she is glad he did. And then 1 line at the bottom, and I want to read it to you the way it is written, because the punctuation is hers. The girls have took to sleeping in the one bed again, which they have not done since they were small, and I let them, though it is hot. That is all. That is the whole of it in the first letter. 2 girls, 11 years old, in August, in a cabin, in the heat, sleeping in one bed instead of 2. The second letter is the 21st of August, 4 days after the store. It is a longer letter, and most of it is ordinary, and then about 2/3 of the way down it does something that letters do not usually do. It changes handwriting. Not the hand, the pressure. The archivist who cataloged the collection in 1951 noted it. From the middle of the 3rd page on, the pen bears down noticeably harder and stays that way to the end. Here is what she was writing when it changed. Absalom has walked the fence at the north corner twice this week. He says the line of the trees is wrong. I went out and looked at it with him, and I will tell you what I saw, and you may make of it what you want to. The trees back of the north corner have got no low brush under them. Not a stem. It is swept. Permelia. It is swept as clean as a floor, for I should say 40 feet in, and it is not that way anywhere else on the place, nor anywhere I have ever seen woods. Now, if you have spent any time in eastern hardwood forest, you know what she is describing, and you know why it stopped a farm woman in her tracks. Appalachian woods in August are a mess. Greenbrier, blackberry, seedling maple, poison ivy up the trunks, deadfall, leaf litter. You do not walk through it, you push through it. Open woods happen under a heavy beech canopy, or where stock has grazed it out, but stock had never been in Nettle Hollow. And an open floor does not stop in a line. Absalom Nettle stepped it off. He was that kind of man. The ledger has it, in the margin of the August accounts, in his hand. Clear Grand N Core, 40 PCE. Wide 38 PCE, 40 paces wide, 38 paces in. A rectangle, something on the order of 110 feet by 100 feet of forest floor with nothing growing on it, sharing its downhill edge with his fence line. He cut a stake and drove it at each of the 4 corners so he could tell whether it moved. I am going to let that sit for a second, because I want you to appreciate what kind of man does that. He did not go to the preacher. He did not go to Dunk Sizemore. He did not tell his wife it was nothing. He took a measurement, and he put in control stakes, and he waited to see. It moved, not that week. He checked it on the 28th of August, and it was where he left it. He checked it again on the 11th of September, and there is a line in the ledger, and this is the whole line, and it is the only time in 11 years of that ledger that the man uses an exclamation point. Encore grinned, now 44 PCE wide. Stakes not moved. The stakes had not moved. The stakes were exactly where he had driven them, but the swept ground now ran 4 paces past the western stake into what had been thick brush 3 weeks before. It had gotten bigger by about 11 feet on one side, and it had done it without disturbing a single one of his markers, and it had done it in a way that left no cut stems, no dragged brush, no browse line, no fire, no sign of anything at all. The brush was simply not there anymore, and the ground under where it had been was clean. Hold on to that number. 4 paces. It comes up again, and when it does, it is not measuring ground. Now I am going to tell you about the barn, and then I am going to tell you about the footprints, and then we are going to get to the night in September that I think is the actual hinge of this entire case. And after that, we are going into the church cellar, where there is a book that nobody was supposed to find. The barn. The Nettle barn was built by Absalom's father in 1868. It was a small bank barn, 4 bents, sided in oak. Absalom had re-roofed it in 1886 and rehung the big door in 1890. On the 4th of September, 1892, he could not shut the big door. It stuck about 2 inches from closed. He planed the edge. The next morning it stuck at the same place. He planed it again, took nearly a half-inch off, and hung it back, and it swung shut clean, and he thought no more about it until the 9th, when it stuck again, and this time he measured the opening. The doorway was 3/4 of an inch narrower than the figure he had written down in 1890 when he hung the door. 3/4 of an inch. On a doorway. In a barn that had been standing for 24 years, that had not been hit, that had no rot in the posts, that sat on a stone foundation, and that showed no crack anywhere in the siding, because I want you to understand, if a barn racks, it tells on itself. The boards separate. Nails back out. Something splits. Absalom Nettle went over that building board by board, and in the ledger there is a list of everything he checked, 17 items, every one of them with the word sound after it. 17 sound, and a doorway 3/4 of an inch too small. He wrote one more line under it, and it is the first time in the ledger that the tone changes from a farmer's to something else. It is the same barn. It is not the same size. Hester's letter of the 18th of September is where the household starts to come apart, and it is worth noting that she still, at this point, has not used a single word in 9 pages that suggests anything but a run of odd luck. She is not a superstitious writer. She mentions God twice in 9 letters, and both times as a formality. Here is the 18th of September. The dog will not come in the yard. He comes to the gate and lays down. Absalom carried him in bodily and set him on the porch, and he went off the porch and back to the gate and laid down again, and would not eat until he was put outside the gate. He is not sick. He is fat, and his nose is wet, and he wags when the children go to him. He will not come in the yard. The hens are laying, but I cannot find the eggs. There is no fox, for the hens are all alive, and not a feather turned. I have hunted every foot of that lot. There is 9 hens laying, and no eggs anywhere on this place. Verity is not eating right. She will sit at the table with her hands in her lap, and she will not touch anything, and she says she is not hungry, and she has said she is not hungry, for I believe 6 days. She is not thin. Permelia, that is what I cannot get past. 6 days, and she is not one bit thinner than she was. The dog's name was Bitters. He is in 3 of the letters. He lived, incidentally. I will tell you what happened to Bitters, but not now. Now here is the footprints, and this one is the one I think about at odd hours. The 24th of September. There had been rain on the night of the 23rd, a hard, short rain that laid the dust and left the yard soft. On the morning of the 24th, Absalom Nettle came out at first light and found a line of tracks going from the kitchen door, across the yard, through the gap in the fence at the north corner, and up into the hollow, bare feet, child's size. He followed them. And about 180 yards up, where the ground goes hard and stony, they quit, and he could not pick them up again, and he came back down. And on the way back down he realized that there was a second set, going the other way, coming out of the hollow, down to the fence, across the yard, to the kitchen door. Same bare feet, same size, which would be nothing, which would be an 11-year-old girl who got up in the night, went out, walked up the hollow a ways, got frightened, and came home. And any parent in any century could tell you that story, except that Absalom Nettle, who measured things, measured the stride, going up. 19 inches, heel to heel, consistent. Coming down, 26. A 7-inch difference in the stride length of the same size foot. And he wrote in the ledger, "And this is the line, this is the one that gets me. Same foot. Longer walk. Something come back that did not go up." Both girls were in the house. Both girls were asleep in the one bed when he had gone out at first light, and he had looked at them on his way through the room, and he wrote down that he looked at them. Both girls' feet were clean. Both girls' feet were clean, and there was a set of wet child's tracks on the kitchen floorboards, from the door to the bed. And this is where I have to be honest with you about something, because this is a documentary and not a campfire, and the difference is that a campfire gets to skip the part I am about to do. There is a version of every single thing I have told you so far that is ordinary. Woods can open up. Beach drop kills understory, and can do it in patches with startlingly straight edges where the soil changes. A barn can shift on a stone foundation with a wet summer and a dry one. Dogs get spooked and stay spooked. Hens hide nests. And hens that are being robbed by a black snake will lay and lay and lay, and you will never find a shell. Children sleepwalk. Stride length varies. With slope going up, a grade shortens your stride, and coming down lengthens it. And that alone could account for a good part of 19 inches against 26. I want you to know that I know that. I want you to know that Absalom Nettle knew most of it too, and wrote down the ordinary explanation for 4 of the 6 things I have just described in his own ledger, in his own hand, before he wrote down anything else. That is what makes this case what it is. It is not a family losing their heads. It is a careful family, keeping records, applying reasonable explanations one after another, and running out of them. Because here is the thing that has no ordinary version. Here is the one that Absalom Nettle wrote no explanation next to at all. On the night of the 29th of September, 1892, at some hour after midnight, every person in that cabin woke up to the sound of the pump handle in the yard. You remember the pump handle, the bad joint, the sound like a latch coming up somewhere far off, the sound that Ruth Ann Nettle, dead 18 months and buried in the churchyard at Stillwater Fork, could not stand to be in the yard for. It went 11 times, Toll counted. He told Hollis Pitt in 1934 that he counted lying on his pallet in the dark, and that he did not know why he counted, except that counting was something to do with his mind while the rest of him was not working. 11 strokes, slow, evenly spaced, with the little squeal and the little knock, exactly the way it sounded when somebody was drawing water. And then it stopped. And then, he said, his mother got up. He heard her cross the floor in the dark, He heard her stop at the door, and he lay there with his eyes open in the pitch black, listening to his mother stand at the door of that cabin for what he estimated 42 years later at 4 or 5 minutes, without opening it and without going back to bed. And then he heard his father say, from the bed, not loud, in a voice described as the voice he used on a horse that was about to do something. One word. He said, "Hester," and she came back to bed. Nobody went out. In the morning the pump was dry, the bucket under the spout empty, the ground under it dry as chalk, no water drawn, nothing spilled, which is impossible if the handle went down 11 times, because that pump was a working pump and it had been primed the evening before. 11 strokes, and not one drop of water. And there was one more thing in the yard that morning, and I am going to tell you what it was, but I want to put it in its proper place, because it belongs to the next part, and the next part starts with Hester Nettle walking 2.5 miles down to the church at Stillwater Fork on the 2nd of October, 1892, to ask a question and coming home with a book. The church at Stillwater Fork was a frame building 40 by 24 feet, put up in 1859 with a plank floor, 12 benches, and a stone-walled cellar under the east end that had been dug for a stove that was never installed. By 1892, the cellar held what cellars in churches hold: a broken bench, a crate of hymnals with the covers off, a coal scuttle, 3 boxes of the papers of preachers who had come and gone. Hester Nettle went there on the 2nd of October to see a man named Josiah Cabell Meeks, who was the circuit preacher that season and who had the Stillwater Fork congregation one Sunday in 3. He was 31 years old. He had been on that circuit for 2 years. He was, by every account, a decent and not very imaginative man, and he is the reason we have the journal, because he did the single most useful thing anybody does in this entire story. When a woman came to him with a question he could not answer, he did not tell her she was being foolish. He said he would look. We know what she asked him because he wrote it down himself 31 years later in a memoir of his ministry that was printed at his own expense in 1923, and of which there are maybe 40 copies in the world. It has 4 pages about Braddock County, and 3 of those 4 pages are about this. She asked him, had there ever been anything before at the Nettle place? And he said he did not know. And she said, then who would know? And he said, and this is him quoting himself, an old man remembering the moment he stopped being a young man, he said, the dead would know, and they left their papers in my cellar. He spent, by his account, the better part of 2 days down there with a candle, 3 boxes, sermon drafts, marriage records, subscription lists, a quarrel in letters about a stove. And, in the bottom of the 3rd box, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth and tied with a shoelace, a ledger book with marbled boards, about 200 pages, of which 61 were written on. The name on the flyleaf was Isham Quill Petrie. Isham Petrie was the preacher at Stillwater Fork from 1866 to 1871. He was a Virginian. He had been a hospital steward in the war, and he came out of it, as a great many of them did, with a set of nerves that were never right again, and a conviction that the world was thinner than he had been taught. He disappeared on the 19th of October, 1871. The county has him in the record as removed, whereabouts unknown, which is what the record said in 1871 about a man who walked off and did not come back. He was 53 years old. His horse was found, his hat was not, and his journal was in a box in a church cellar for 21 years, until a farm woman asked a question that nobody at Stillwater Fork had asked out loud in a generation. Now, I am going to read you out of Petrie's journal at some length, because this is the spine of the whole thing, and because the man wrote plainly, which is rarer than it ought to be. He was not a fancy writer. He was a hospital steward. He wrote like a man making a list of what he had seen so that somebody after him would not have to see it fresh. The journal starts in 1866, and for 2 years it is a preacher's journal who was sick, who was married, who owed the church $1. The change begins in the autumn of 1868, and it begins, as these things do, with somebody else's trouble. He writes, on the 9th of November, 1868, called out to the Kaywood place. The child, Lovey Kaywood, aged 6 years, was lost 2 days in the ground back of the Nettle farm and is now returned. Mother distracted, father would not speak to me. Child is unhurt and unmarked and was not hungry when found, and has been asleep 30 hours since. I ask why the father will not speak. Elder woman of the house says to me, "Do not ask him, ask me." She says the child come back 4 paces ahead of herself. 4 paces. I told you to hold on to that number. It is not a measurement of ground. Or rather, it started as 1, in this county, a long time before Absalom Nettle drove his stakes, and by 1868 it had become the local way of saying something that has no good words. Patry did not understand it either. He asks, and 2 pages later, on the 14th of November, he gets an answer from a woman he identifies only as the elder Mrs. Kaywood, and here is where the journal stops being a preacher's journal. I have got it out of her at last, and I set it down as she said it because I do not trust my own head to keep it straight. She says some ground is thick and some ground is thin. She says thick ground holds what you put on it. She says thin ground does not hold, and that what happens on thin ground happens twice, because the ground has got a habit of it, and habits in ground are older than people and do not care about people. She says the ground back of the Nettle place is the thinnest in this county, and there is a reason, but she will not give it me. She says the thin ground does not want to hurt anybody. She was firm on this. She said it 3 times. It does not want. It does not want anything. She says it is like a hollow in a stone under a drip that has been dripped on so long that the water goes there now, whether or not anybody wants it to. She says what it does is, it copies. I asked her, copies what? She said, whatever stands in it long enough. A tree, a stone, a hog, a child. I asked her how a person is to know a copy from a thing, and she said, you will not know. Nobody knows. That is the whole of the trouble, and always has been. She says the only thing a copy is short of is a shadow, and that it is short of one only until it is answered to. Until it is answered to. I am going to explain that phrase now, because everything that happens to the Nettle family in the last 3 weeks of October 1892 is that phrase happening to them, and because it is the one piece of this folklore that I have never found anywhere else, in any other county, in any collection. Patry writes it out over the next 4 pages, from the old woman and from 2 other sources he does not name, and it comes down to this. A copy comes out of thin ground, incomplete. It has the shape. It has the face, the voice, the walk. What it does not have is standing. It does not have a place in the world, and the sign of that is that light goes through it in the wrong way, and it puts down no shadow. And it cannot take one. It cannot simply help itself. It has to be given. It is given by being answered to. If you call a copy by the name of the person it is copying, and it answers you, and you accept the answer, that is 1. Do it 3 times, and it is finished. It has the name, and the name is the standing. And after the 3rd time, it has a shadow like anybody, and there is nothing in this world that can tell it from the original. And the original, Petrie writes, goes thin. He asked what that meant. He got an answer that he did not like and did not gloss, and I am not going to gloss it either. The elder Mrs. Kaywood said, they go where there is room, that is all. That is the whole cosmology of Nettle Hollow. Some ground is thin. Thin ground copies what stands in it. The copy has no shadow until it has been answered to 3 times, and after the 3rd time it has one, and the one it copied goes where there is room. Now, Petrie was a hospital steward and a rationalist by temperament, and he did not believe a word of it in 1868. He says so. He writes, in December of that year, a paragraph that I have a certain fondness for, in which he explains to himself, at length and quite well, that grief and isolation and hard winters produce exactly this sort of thing in exactly this sort of place, and that the child, Lovey Cawood, was lost 2 days, and came home, and her family cannot bear it. And so they have built a door in their minds to put the fear behind. That is a good paragraph. It is a smarter paragraph than most people manage. He wrote it on the 11th of December, 1868. Lovey Cawood died on the 20th of January, 1869, aged 6 years, and the county recorded it as croup, and Isham Petrie preached the funeral, and he wrote afterward 1 line, and then nothing at all for 9 days. I have buried a child today that had no shadow on the snow, and I will not sleep in this county tonight. He came back. That is the thing about him. He came back and he stayed 2 more years and he filled 61 pages. And the last 2 years of that journal are a man methodically, stubbornly, and with steadily worsening handwriting, collecting a body of rules. Because that is what the rest of the journal is. Rules, and the reasons for them, and the names of people they did not work for. I am going to give you the ones that matter tonight. 1. It works on grief. Not exclusively, Petrie records a copy of a horse and a copy of a fence, of all things, a section of rail fence that appeared 11 feet from where it belonged and had to be burned. But on people, it goes for grief first, every time, because grief is a hole in a person, and a hole is where a copy fits. It does not copy what you have, he writes. It copies what you are missing. It has got no interest in the living. The living are already answered to. 2. It starts small, and it starts sideways. It does not walk up to your door as your dead child. It comes as the sound your dead child made, as the habit, as the smell of her hair on a pillow. Petrie, it begins with what you would tell nobody, because if you told somebody, they would say you dreamt it, and it knows that, and it uses the shame. 3. 2 of a thing calls it. 2 lamps. 2 of anything, set out in the dark, in a place where the ground is thin. Petrie does not know why, and neither did his informants. The best he gets is from an old man at the head of the hollow who tells him, "It is looking for a pear. Do not show it one." 4. And this is the one that saves Toll Nettle's life 21 years later, so listen to it. The counting. Petrie writes it out. On the 11th of February, 1870, he got it from 3 separate people who did not know each other and gave him the same thing, which is the sort of corroboration that turns a superstition into a practice. You count. Out loud, backward, from any number you like, down to 1. And the reason is that a copy can follow you, but it cannot lead you. It has your voice and your face and your habits, but it does not have your intent. And counting backward from a number you have chosen at random is pure intent. There is nothing to imitate, because the next number is not in the world yet, it is only in your head. Petrie writes, they say the thing can say every word you have ever said. They say it cannot say a word you have not said yet. Count down, and it will get the numbers wrong, or it will get them right too late. And either way, you will hear it. And hearing it is the whole of your protection, for a thing that is heard cannot be answered to. And underneath that, in the same entry, in a different ink, added later, note, this is not a defense, it is a lantern. It shows you the thing. It does not stop the thing. Do not let anybody tell a frightened person that it stops the thing, which is, I think, the most honest sentence anybody in this whole case ever wrote down. And it matters, because it means the ritual has a flaw, and the flaw is that it only ever tells you the truth. It never once makes the truth better. The journal of Isham Quill Petrie runs to the 16th of October, 1871, 3 days before he vanished. And I want to tell you how it ends, because it does not end the way you would write it if you were making it up. It ends the way things actually end, which is with a reasonable man doing a reasonable thing for a reason that anybody listening to this would understand. Isham Petrie had a wife. Her name was Amanda Lark Petrie, and she died in Richmond, Virginia, in the second week of March, 1863, while he was 300 miles away in a hospital tent of a fever that went through that city that spring and killed a great many people whose names are not written down anywhere as carefully as hers is in the front of this book. He does not mention her once in the first 50 pages, not once. Then, on the 3rd of September, 1871, he writes, "There is a sound in this house at night that I am not going to write down, because I know what writing it down does. I have read my own book. I know the order of it. I am going to say only that it is a small sound, and that it is a sound I have not heard in 8 years, and that I have been sitting up to hear it." That is the second rule happening to the man who wrote the second rule. 2 weeks later, the 21st of September, "It has got the sound wrong. I have been waiting for it to get something wrong, and tonight it did. She hummed at her work, and the hum was in the throat, low, and this is in the nose. It is close. It is very close. But it is in the nose. I am not comforted by this, as I expected to be. I find I am angry. I find that I wanted to do it right. I wanted to do it right. There it is. That is the trap, and it is not a trap made of teeth. It is a trap made of the exact thing that every person who has lost somebody would give a year of their life for one more minute, done right. The 8th of October. It has said my name once, the 12th of October. Twice I did not answer. I counted down from 90, and I heard it try to count with me and fall behind at the 60s. I have never in my life been so frightened and so glad at once. It is real. Everything in this book is real. Every word of it. God forgive me, but I have wanted it to be real for 3 years. And then, the 16th of October, 1871, the last entry, which is a page and a half long, and which I am going to give you almost whole, because it is the clearest account anybody ever wrote of the decision at the center of this case. I have thought it through, and I will set out my reasoning, so that whoever finds this can see that I was not out of my mind when I did it. First, the thing wants a third answer. It has had 2. It will not force the third, and I have satisfied myself that it cannot. Everything in this book, says the third, must be given, and given knowing, or it is worth nothing to it. That is why it waits. That is why it has waited on this ground since before there was a county here. Second, I am 53 years old. I have no children. I have no relation nearer than a cousin at Lynchburg. If I go where there is room, there is no one in this world who is much the worse for it, and I have looked at that fact honestly, and I do not find it as bitter as I expected. Third, and this is the whole of it, every account I have collected, every one, comes from somebody standing outside the door. Nobody has ever come back and said what it is. The Cawood child could not say. She was 6. They all of them run, and they are right to run. And because they run, we know nothing. And because we know nothing, this ground will still be doing this in 100 years to somebody's daughter. So, I am going up tonight, and I am going to answer it the 3rd time, and I am going to have this book in my coat, and if I can put down what happens, I will put it down. If you are reading this, and I did not come back, then hear me on this one thing, because it is the only thing I am certain of, and it is the reason I am writing at all, instead of simply going, do not do what I am doing. I am doing it because I have nothing to lose, and that is the only lawful reason, and there is no one else in this county who can say it truthfully. If you have got one soul that would miss you, You have got too much to lose. Bar your door. Count backward. Do not answer. Not once. Not for any voice. And if you have already answered twice, then you must leave this ground and you must never come back to it, not for a house, not for land, not for a grave. And that is the end of the sentence, and the end of the page, and the end of the writing of Isham Quil Patri, because he did not finish it. There is no period. The next page is blank, and so are the 139 after it. The book was found in a church cellar, in a piece of oilcloth tied with a shoelace. Nobody knows who put it there. Petrie lived alone. Somebody carried that journal down out of Nettle Hollow, wrapped it, tied it, and left it where a preacher would find it. I have thought about that for a long time. Let me step out of the dark for just a moment, and then we go straight back in. If this case is holding you, the rest of the collection is where the others are, the thin ground. 12 of these, 10 hours. The link in the description and pinned in the comments. And tell me in the comments what you would have done in Patrie's place. Not what you should have done. What you would have done. At 53, with nobody to miss you, and a voice outside that has your wife's hum almost exactly right. I read them. Now, let us go back to the 2nd of October, 1892, and a farm woman walking 2.5 miles home uphill with that book under her arm. She read it that night. All of it by one lamp at the table, with her husband asleep and her children asleep and the door barred. We know this because of the 7th letter written on the 4th of October to her sister at Cumberland, and the 7th letter is not like the others. The first 6 are a woman telling her sister about her life. The 7th is a woman leaving a record. It is 4 pages. It is written in a hand that is noticeably steadier than the letter before it, and it begins without a greeting. Permelia. If anything comes of us here, I want somebody outside this county to have this written down. There is a book. I have got it, and I am keeping it. And I have told Absalom what is in it, and he has said he does not believe it. And then he went out and looked at the north corner for an hour in the dark. And I will let you decide what a man believes by what he does. I am going to set down what I know as against what I have been told. What I have been told is that the ground back of this place makes copies of what stands on it, and that a copy has got no shadow until it is answered to 3 times by its right name, and after the 3rd time it has got one, and the one it copied is gone where there is room. What I know is that on the 29th of September, the pump handle went 11 times in the night and drew no water, and that Ruth Ann was afraid of that pump, and that there is no living soul in this world besides the 5 of us in this house that knows she was afraid of that pump. For it is not a thing you tell anybody. It is too small to tell. What I know is that I got up that night and stood at the door, and I was not going to open it, and I want that written down. I was not going to open it. What I know is that I have got 2 daughters, and I am going to write down the rest of this plain because there is no use being delicate with my own sister. Since the middle of August, one of my daughters has not eaten. Not one bite that I have seen, and I have watched, and I have set food in front of her and taken it away untouched 21 days out of the last 30, and she is not thinner, and she is not weaker, and she is not sick. Since the middle of August, one of my daughters has not been warm. I have had my hand on her 100 times. She is not cold like a sick person. She is cold like a wall. Since the middle of August, one of my daughters has quit a habit she had all her life and has took up her sister's, and I cannot tell you which one it is. Permelia. I have looked at them since the day they were born, and I cannot tell you which one it is, because I never could tell them apart by their faces. I told them apart by what they did, and the one that does not eat does not do anything at all that is her own. That is the 7th letter. And I want to point out what she does next, because Hester Nettle deserves it. She does not fall apart. She does not go to the preacher again. She sits down at that table on the 4th of October, 1892, and she works out a test. And the test she comes up with is the reason there is a photograph in this story at all, and the reason I have been putting off telling you about the third plate. Her test was this. On the 5th of October, 1892, at 20 minutes past noon, under a clear sky, Hester Nettle sent both her daughters out into the middle of the yard on an errand she invented. She told them to shake out a quilt between them, and she stood on the porch and looked at the ground. Both of them had a shadow. Both. Plain, black, ordinary noon shadows, short and hard-edged, the way October noon makes them, one under each girl, moving when the girls moved. She wrote that she went inside and sat down and could not get her breath for a while, out of pure relief. And then she did the thing that separates her from almost everybody else in this account. She did not stop testing, because something had bothered her, standing on that porch, and she could not name it, and it took her until the following afternoon to work out what it was. And what it was the angle. Two people standing 8 feet apart, in the same yard, under the same sun, at the same minute, throw their shadows in the same direction. Not roughly, exactly. That is not folklore, that is the solar system. And any farm woman who has ever set a clothesline knows it in her body, without ever having been taught it as a fact. On the 6th of October, she took a ball of string out to the yard at noon, and she did it properly. She set both girls where she wanted them. She laid a length of string down the length of the first shadow and cut it. She laid a length down the second and cut it. She brought both strings inside. They were not the same length. One was longer, by an amount she describes as the width of my hand and a finger, call it 5 inches. Two girls, identical twins, within a half-inch of each other in height, standing in the same sun at the same minute. And she went back out. And she did it again the next day at the same hour, and it was the same, and the day after that. And on the 9th of October, she wrote the 8th letter. And it is 9 lines long. And it is the shortest thing in the collection. Permelia. The shadow is short by 5 inches. It has been 3 days running. It is not the sun, and it is not the ground, for I have had them stand in the other's place, and it follows the girl and not the spot. It is verity. I have not told Absalom. I do not know what a man does with a thing like this, and I am afraid of what he would do. I am going up to the head of the hollow tomorrow to see the old woman. Now let me tell you about the old woman. Her name was Ottilie Craven. In October of 1892, she was 91 years old, which meant she had been born in 1801 in a country with 16 states in it. She lived in a 2-room house at the head of the hollow, not Nettle Hollow, but the larger valley the settlement sat in, about 1.25 miles past the church, at the end of a track that a wagon could not use. She was not a healer, exactly, and she was not a witch, and the county did not have a word for her, and neither, honestly, do I. The nearest thing is what Hollis Pitt wrote in his notes in 1934, when he was trying to explain to a state office in Charleston what sort of informant he had been dealing with in these mountains. There is generally one household in a district which is understood to keep the account of the district. They do not seek it. It is left to them the way a debt is left to them. Ottilie Craven had been left the account by her aunt, a woman named Sabra Craven, in 1829, and she told Hester Nettle that she had not wanted it, and that she had been 63 years at it, and that she had never once been thanked, and had never once expected to be. We have this conversation in 2 sources, which, for something spoken in a 2-room house in 1892, is close to miraculous. We have Hester's 9th and final letter, written the same evening, and we have Toll's account to Hollis Pitt, because Toll walked his mother up there and sat on the step outside the whole time, with the door open, and heard every word, and remembered a startling amount of it 42 years later. Where the 2 accounts overlap, they agree, and where they differ in the way that 2 honest people differ, which is on the order of things rather than the substance. Hester told her everything. The lamps, the swept ground, the barn door, the stride, the pump handle, the eating, the cold, the habits swapping over, the string, and the old woman listened all the way to the end without saying one word, and then asked 3 questions. The first question was, "When did you bury the least one?" Hester said February of the year before. The second question was, "Did you have a likeness made of her?" And Hester said no. No, they had not. There was no picture of Ruth Ann Nettle in the world, and there never would be. And Ottilie Craven, according to both accounts, closed her eyes at that and kept them closed for a while. And the third question was, "Has anybody made a likeness on that ground since?" And Hester said yes. In August, a traveling man out of Ohio, 3 plates, and the old woman said, "Then it is already outside the county, and there is nothing you nor I can do about that part of it, and it may be the best thing that ever happened here," which nobody understood at the time. Hester wrote it down without understanding it. Toll repeated it to Hollis Pitt in 1934 without understanding it. I am not certain I understand it now, but I have an idea about it, and I will give you my idea at the end, when you have got everything I have got. Then Ottilie Craven told her the cosmology, and she told it the way these women told things, which is in about 4 sentences with nothing wasted. She said, "Some ground is thick and some is thin. Thin ground has got a habit of doing a thing twice. It is not evil. No more than a mirror is evil. A mirror don't want you. It just cannot help what it does when you stand in front of it." She said, "There is thin ground all over this world, and most of it never troubles anybody, because most of it has got nothing standing on it but trees, and a tree don't mind being 2, she said. It goes bad where somebody has stood on it and wanted something back. That is the whole of it. Thin ground and an open want. You cannot have the one without the other. This county has got the ground. Your house has got the want." And Hester Nettle said, "And this is in her own letter, and it is the only time in 9 letters that she writes anything about herself that is not a report." I said to her, "Then it is my doing, for I am the one that wants her back." And she said, "No." She said everybody in the world wants somebody back, and there is not enough thin ground in creation for all of them. She said it is bad luck and bad ground and nothing else, and that if I go to work blaming myself, I will be no use to my children, and that being of use to my children is the only business I have got now. I like that woman very much. Then she gave the rules. And these are the refined ones, the practical ones, the ones that are not folklore but procedure, and I want to lay them out clearly, because from here to the end of this story, every single thing that happens is somebody either following them or failing to. The first rule was the counting, the same as Patrice, but she gave it a shape he did not have. She said, "Count backward, out loud, from a number nobody in the house has said that day." She said the number is the whole of it. Do not use 10. Do not use 100. Use a number you have just made up, and use a different one every time, and never say the number you are going to use out loud before you start. The second rule was about the name, and this is the one that matters most. She said, "It cannot take the name off you. You have got to hand it over 3 times, and each time you have got to mean it. You have got to be talking to it as her," she said. And Toll remembered this exactly, sitting on the step. It ain't the word. It is the meaning behind the word. You can holler her name at the wall all day and do it no good at all. But you look at that thing in the eye and say her name to it like you believe it, 3 times, and it is done, and you done it. Which means, and I want to make sure this lands, because it is the mechanism of the entire tragedy that follows the danger in that house was never the thing outside. The danger was a mother who wanted, more than she wanted anything on this earth, to say a name and have something answer. The third rule was no pairs, same as Dunk Sizemore, same as Petrie. 1 lamp, 1 chair at the door, Do not set out two of anything after dark. And she added this, do not let the two girls stand together in the open where the ground can see them both at once. And the fourth rule was the one that Hester Nettle did not follow, and I do not blame her for it, and you will not either. The fourth rule was, leave. Tonight. Leave the stock, leave the corn in the crib, leave the furniture, take the children, and go to the far side of the county, and do not come back for anything. Hester said they could not. It was October. The corn was standing. They had $11.40 in the house, and a farm they owned outright, and nowhere to go, and 4 mouths, and winter coming, and no man in 1892 walks away from 41 acres on the word of an old woman at the head of a hollow. And Ottilie Craven said, and this is the last thing in the letter, and Hester underlined it, and I want to read it exactly as it sits on the page. She said, I have said this to 11 families in 63 years, and 2 of them went, and 9 of them stayed. And I have got the names of the 9 wrote down in a book, and I would rather not write yours. Now, I have owed you something for about an hour, and this is the place to pay it. I told you that on the morning after the pump handle went 11 times, there was something in the yard, and that I would tell you what it was when we got to its proper place. We are at its proper place. It was a shoe, a child's shoe, left foot, size to fit, about a 2-year-old, of the kind that was made with a soft sole and a single button at the ankle. It was sitting upright, on the packed dirt of the yard, about 9 steps from the kitchen door, directly under the spout of the pump. Upright, not dropped, placed, the way you place a shoe when you set it down to be put on. Absalom Nettle saw it first, and he ded not touch it, because Toll had told him the 3 rules the boy had come back from the store on the 17th of August, and repeated Dunk Sizemore's 3 rules to his father word for word, and his father had listened to all 3 without a word, and then said, get the salt in out of the damp, and that was that. But he had heard them. So he left it. 2 sunrises, the rule said. He left it there through the 30th of September, and he left it there through the 1st of October, and on the morning of the 2nd of October, when Hester walked down to the church to ask her question, the shoe was still there, upright, under the spout, and Absalom Nettle went out and picked it up. It was only a shoe, except that Hester Nettle had buried a pair of shoes exactly like it, on a child exactly that size, in the churchyard at Stillwater Fork on the 4th of February, 1891. She had put them on herself. She writes about it. And it is the one place in 9 letters where the woman's writing comes apart on the page. The line runs downhill, and the words get bigger. And I want to be very careful here, because I know how this sounds, and I know what you are already thinking, and I have thought it too. Children's shoes in 1892 were not rare, and they were not unique. That style was sold by the thousand. Hand-me-downs went around a settlement of 11 households the way news does. There were at least 4 families at Stillwater Fork with children who had passed through that size in the previous 3 years, and any one of those shoes could have been carried into that yard by a dog, by a child, by a hog, by the flood in the branch that spring. Absalom Nettle thought of all of that. He wrote the plainest possible sentence about it in his ledger. And it is not a frightened sentence, it is a farmer's sentence, and that is exactly what makes it hard to read. Shoe in YD 29, Sept. Took it up 2 October. It is the mate to the one I have got in the box on the mantel. The mate? They had kept one. Of course they had. Anybody who has ever cleared out a child's things knows that you do not get rid of all of it. You keep one small item, because getting rid of the last of it is a thing you cannot make your hands do. The Nettles had kept one shoe, the right, in a box on the mantel for 20 months, and on the 29th of September, 1892, the left one was standing under the pump. Absalom put them in the box together. That is the last line of that entry. He put them in the box together, which is the most human thing anybody does in this whole account, and possibly the worst decision anybody makes in it, because if you have been listening carefully, you already know what the third rule was, from all three sources, from Dunk Sizemore and Isham Petrie and Ottilie Craven, in 3 different decades, all saying the same thing. Do not set out a pair. There had been 1 shoe in that house for 20 months, and nothing had come of it. On the 2nd of October there were 2, in a box, on the mantel, 9 feet from the door. Hester came home from the old woman's on the 10th of October and told her husband everything, and this is where Absalom Nettle stops being a background figure in his own story. Toll described what his father did, and it is such a specific and such a strangely moving list of actions that I am going to give it to you as a list. He went out to the barn and got a piece of white oak, 4 feet long, 3 inches by 4, that he had been saving for a single tree. He came in, and he cut it to the exact width of the door frame, and he set 2 iron staples, 1 in each jamb, and he laid that bar across the door, and from the 10th of October, 1892, until the day he died in 1919, Absalom Nettle slept behind a barred door every night of his life. He took every lamp in the house but 1, and he carried them out to the smokehouse. He took the box off the mantel. He did not throw the shoes in the fire, which is what you might expect, and I think the reason he did not is the same reason he had kept the first one for 20 months. He carried the box out to the barn, and he put it in the bottom of the corn crib, under about 40 bushels of corn, which is a thing you can only do if you are a man who cannot destroy something and cannot have it in the house either. And then he sat his son down, and he told him, "You are 14. If it comes to it, and I am not here, you get your mother and your sisters down that road to the Craven woman, and you do not stop, and you do not turn around, and you do not answer anybody." And Toll Nettle said, "Which sisters?" He told Hollis Pitt in 1934 that he did not know why he said it. He said the words came out before he had thought them, and he said his father looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Both of them. You take both of them, and you do not decide anything on that road. Deciding is not your job." Now we come to the 11th of October, and the thing in the hollow, and I want to slow all the way down here, because this is the part of the case that people who know this story remember, and it is also the part that gets told wrong the most. Absalom Nettle went up into Nettle Hollow on the morning of the 11th of October, 1892, with a rifle and a hatchet, and his son, in broad daylight, with the sun well up, and he went for a reason that was not bravery and not investigation. He went because he had lost a hog. That is all. The world does not arrange these things dramatically. He had 11 hogs running the far side of the ridge, and he was short one, and he needed to know whether he had a dog problem before winter. They found the hog. It was standing in the swept ground at the north corner, alive, unhurt, facing up the hollow, and it would not be driven. Toll said they got behind it and pushed it, and it walked forward 4 or 5 steps, and then turned around and went back to the same place and faced the same way. They tried 3 times. On the 3rd time, Absalom stood back and looked at where the animal was standing and where it was facing, and then he said, "All right," and went up the hollow. 1,100 yards, 20 minutes at a walk. They found it at about 600 yards, up on the left-hand bench above the branch, in a stand of second-growth oak, 9 locust posts set in a ring. Locust. Because locust is what you use when you want a post to outlive you. A black locust post set in this country will stand 50 years, and some of them stand 100. 9 of them, peeled of bark, set in a circle that Absalom Nettle stepped off at 31 paces around, which puts it at something on the order of 30 feet across. They were not new. The wood was silver gray and checked with age, and 2 of them were leaning. Absalom guessed 20 years, and he was probably guessing low, and every one of the 9 posts had marks cut into it. Tallies, 4 vertical strokes and a 5th across, the way everybody who has ever counted anything has counted it, cut with a knife, in groups, running from about knee height up to as high as a man could comfortably reach. Toll counted the marks on the nearest post while his father walked the ring. He was 14, and he was frightened, and counting was what he did with his hands and his head, and he counted that post twice to be sure. 206 on one post. And there were 9 posts, and he did not count the rest, and his father did not let him stay long enough to. Now, what were the tallies? I want to give you the 3 honest possibilities, because I have never seen anybody give more than one. The first possibility is days. Somebody stood in that ring and marked the passing of time, and 206 days is most of a year, and 9 posts is 9 of something. The second possibility is that they were counted down, not up, that somebody was keeping the count that Petrie describes backward, out loud, in a place where it was needed, and cutting a mark each time they got to the bottom without being answered. A tally of survivals. And the third possibility is the one I think is right, and I think it is right because of what was in the middle of the ring. In the middle of the ring there was a flat stone, about the size of a tabletop, set level in the ground, and on the stone there were 2 shallow depressions worn into the rock, side by side, about 18 inches apart. 2. They were the shape and spacing of 2 feet standing, not carved, worn, the way a doorstep wears, the way the stone sill of an old church wears, from 150 years of the same boots in the same place. Something had stood on that rock, in that spot, in that ring, often enough and long enough to wear 2 hollows into stone. And Absalom Nettle looked at that for I do not know how long, and then he said to his son, "Do not step on it." And they went home, and they did not go back. And when they came out of the hollow, the hog was gone from the swept ground, and it was down in the lot with the other 10, eating, and there were 11 hogs, and there had been 11 all along, and Absalom Nettle counted them 4 times. From the 11th of October to the 16th is 5 days, and those 5 days are the tightest, worst documented, and in my opinion the most frightening stretch of this entire case, and everything we know about them comes from Toll. In 1934, at the age of 56, sitting at a kitchen table in Ohio with a stranger writing down what he said. He told Hollis Pitt that his father did not sleep, not slept badly, did not sleep. Absalom Nettle sat up in a chair with the rifle across his knees, facing the barred door, 5 nights running, and Toll said that on the 3rd night he got up to go to his father, and his father said, without turning around, "Go back to bed, and if you hear me talking, do not come out here." He told Pitt that his mother moved both girls' bed, that she dragged it, by herself, out of the corner where it had stood for 11 years, and put it against the inside wall, so that it did not share a wall with the outside of the house. He told Pitt that the whip-poor Wills never came back. Not that fall, and not the next spring either, and that he asked a man in 1906 who had bought part of the old Nettle ground for pasture, and that man told him he had never heard one in that hollow in his life, and had not known there was such a bird until he heard one in Nicholas County. And he told Pitt about the 14th of October, which is the night that Verity Nettle spoke. I need to set this up properly. Since the middle of August, one of the 2 girls had been going quiet, not silent. Quiet, in a way the family described as being agreeable, she answered, when spoken to in short answers, and she did what she was told, and she smiled when smiling was called for, and she did not start a conversation. In 8 weeks, according to Toll, she had not once started a conversation, and the other one had gone the other way entirely, and here is where it gets awful. The other one had gotten frightened, not of the hollow, of her sister. Toll said that Corinne and he was very careful, in 1934, to say that he was using the name he used at the time, and that he was not making any claim about which girl was which. Toll said that Corinne had taken to sleeping with her back against the wall and her face toward the room, and that she had asked him, in the last week of September, a question that he could not answer, and that he still could not answer 42 years later. She asked him, "Toll, when you look at her, do you have to keep looking?" He said he did not know what she meant, and she said, "When I look at her, I have got to keep looking. If I look away, I cannot remember what she looks like. And she is my own face." Now, the 14th of October, the family was at supper. One lamp, barred door, Absalom in his chair, and the girl who had not eaten since August was at the table, as she had been every night, with a plate in front of her that she would not touch, and the family had stopped remarking on it, because there is only so long you can go on remarking on a thing. And in the middle of the meal, into a silence, she started to hum. One note, low, flat, contented, over and over, the way a small child hums when there is food in front of her. I told you at the beginning of this to hold on to 3 things about a 2-year-old girl who died in February of 1891, and I told you they would matter more than anything else in the story. Here is the first one, coming out of the mouth of an 11-year-old at a supper table 14 months after the last person in the world who made that sound was put in the ground. Toll said nobody moved. He said his mother put down her fork very carefully and put both hands in her lap. He said his father said, "Stop that," and she stopped. Immediately. And she smiled at her father and she said, "Yes, sir," and went back to not eating. And then, and this is the part, Toll said he had never told anybody before 1934, including his own wife. Then his mother said, quietly, not looking up from the table, "Do it again." And Absalom Nettle stood up so fast his chair went over backward, and he said his wife's name once. The way he had said it in the dark on the night of the 29th of September, and Hester Nettle put her hands over her face and sat there, and nobody said anything else for the rest of the meal. Now here is why the hum matters, technically, and here is where I have to give you the piece of this that I think is the actual engine of the whole thing. Ruth Ann Nettle hummed while she ate. The girl at that table was not eating. She had the sound. She did not have the reason for the sound. She reproduced the effect without the cause, which is exactly what Isham Petrie describes on page after page, the hum in the nose instead of the throat, the stride 7 inches too long, the shadow 5 inches too short. It gets the thing right. It does not get the sense of the thing right, because the sense of a thing is not visible from the outside, and it is only ever working from the outside. And that is the whole of the flaw. That is the crack in it. Everything anybody in this county ever knew about how to survive that ground comes down to one sentence. It can copy what you do, and it cannot copy why. That is what the counting is for. That is why you count backward from a number you have just made up. It is not magic. It is the one test in the world that a perfect copy fails. Because the answer is not in the room, the answer is in your intention, and intention is the one thing that does not have an outside. The 9th letter is dated the 14th of October, 1892, and it was written that night, after that supper. It is the last one. Permelia Boyer at Cumberland, Maryland, received it on the 20th. It is 3 lines. Permelia, I have done a thing tonight I am ashamed of, and I am not going to write down what it was. If you get another letter from me, it will be from somewhere else. If you do not get another letter, go to the state and make them look at that ground. She never wrote again, and she never had to, because on the 17th of October, 1892, Absalom Nettle walked 2.5 miles down to the store at Stillwater Fork and stood in the door and said to Dunk Sizemore, in front of 2 other men whose names are in the county record because they gave statements later, "My girls are gone, both of them. Ring the bell." If you are still with me this deep into the dark, put a fire in the comments so I know you are there, and I will keep making these. The link to the collection is below, and it is where I keep the other 11. The bell at Stillwater Fork was on a post outside the church, and it was rung for one of 3 reasons: service, fire, or a lost child. Everybody in that district knew the difference by the rhythm. Dunk Sizemore rang it at 10 in the morning on the 17th of October, and by 2 in the afternoon there were 31 men and 11 women on the Nettle place, and by dark of that first day there were more than 60, because word went down the Little Sang and up both forks and into 2 adjoining districts. And this is a thing about those settlements that I do not want lost in all the rest of this. When a child went missing, everybody came. Everybody. You shut the store, you left the corn standing, you walked 11 miles in the dark. That is not sentiment. That is the actual documented behavior. And there is a list of names of the men who searched, and it survives because the county paid $2.50 for the paper and lamp oil used, and somebody had to justify the expense. They searched for 9 days. I want to give you the shape of that search, because it is the only part of this case that generated a real paper trail at the time, and because the paper trail contains 3 things that nobody has ever satisfactorily explained. The first day they searched the farm and the near ground: barn, crib, loft, springhouse, smokehouse, the lot, the orchard, the 2 nearest neighbors' places, standard. They found nothing. On the second day, they searched the hollow. 60-some men, walking abreast at arm's length, from the fence line to the head of it, 1,100 yards, and then back down the other bench. And then they did it again in the afternoon. Here is the first unexplained thing. Not one of those men mentions a ring of 9 locust posts. Not one. There are 14 surviving statements from the search, taken over the following 2 weeks by a justice of the peace named Ora Whit Kello, and they describe the hollow in detail: the branch, the benches, the second-growth oak, a rock overhang, a fallen chestnut that 4 men mention because they had to climb over it, and there is no ring, no posts, no flat stone. Absalom Nettle told Kelloe about the ring. It is in his statement. He described it and gave its location and said his son had seen it too. And Ora Kello wrote in his own hand, at the bottom of Absalom's statement, "Walked to the place described this date with the witness. Nothing found. Ground is thick with brush and has not been cleared in some years." Thick with brush. The second unexplained thing is the swept ground at the north corner. It was gone. By the 18th of October, the rectangle of clean forest floor that Absalom Nettle had measured at 44 paces by 38 and staked at 4 corners and written about in his ledger 3 times was ordinary woods, full of greenbrier, with 2 of his 4 stakes still standing exactly where he had driven them, and the brush grown up around them so thick that 1 man cut his hand getting to one. Grown up around them in 5 weeks. In October, when nothing grows. And the third thing is the dog. Bitters had not come inside the yard fence since the middle of September. He would come to the gate and lie down. He did that for 5 weeks, and nothing on this earth could get him past it. On the second day of the search, at some time in the afternoon, Bitters got up and walked into the yard, across it, up to the kitchen door, and lay down on the step and stayed there. And a man named Wiley Dunavant, who was there, and who gave a statement, said this, and it is 1 sentence, and I have never gotten over it. The dog come in the yard, and I said to Absalom, "That is a good sign," and he sat down on the ground where he was standing, and he did not get up for some while, because Absalom Nettle understood what it meant. The dog had not been afraid of the yard. The dog had been afraid of what was in the house. And on the afternoon of the 18th of October, whatever it was not in there any more. It was out where they were looking. Days 3 through 8 of the search widened out the way searches did. They dragged 2 holes in the Little Sang. They walked the ridge to the county line. They went into every abandoned structure within 6 miles, of which there were 9, because that country was full of places people had given up on. They put word out on the Ambler Road, and a man rode to the railhead at Fenner Junction to ask whether 2 girls had been seen on a train, which was the going assumption in 1892 whenever a child vanished. Somebody took them, and if somebody took them, they went out on the rails. Nothing. 9 days, nothing. And you have to understand what 9 days meant in that season. It was the 3rd week of October in the West Virginia mountains. There were 4 frosts in those 9 days, and one hard one. Orakello's notes record ice on the horse trough on the morning of the 22nd. It rained on the 19th and again on the night of the 23rd. 2 girls, 11 years old, in cotton dresses and no coats, because their coats were both on the peg by the door and are specifically mentioned in the statements as being on the peg by the door. By the 6th day, the men were not looking for 2 girls anymore. Nobody said so. On the 6th day, a man named Prather brought a pair of dogs from the far side of the county. And the reason you bring dogs on the 6th day is not the reason you bring dogs on the 1st, and every man in that hollow knew it, and Absalom Nettle knew it, and he walked out with them anyway. The dogs would not go into the hollow, both of them. They worked the farm fine, they worked the ridge fine, and at the fence line at the north corner they sat down and would not be led. Prather, who is on record as having been very embarrassed about this, said he had never had a dog do it in 11 years, and he could not account for it, and he took them home on the 7th day. On the 9th day, the 25th of October, 1892, at about 11 o'clock in the morning, a boy named Sherwood Kaiser, 16 years old, who was not part of the organized search that morning because he had been sent to bring a mule back from a neighbor and was cutting across the head of the hollow to save himself a mile, found the Nettle twins. They were standing in the branch bed at the head of Nettle Hollow, about 1,100 yards up, side by side, facing down the hollow in the direction of the house. Standing. Sherwood Kaiser gave a statement to Orakello 2 days later, and it is the single most quoted document in this case, and it deserves to be. He was 16. He was a farm boy. He was not trying to write literature, and the statement runs about 400 words, and here is what is in it. They were standing in about 2 inches of running water. They were in the same clothes they had gone missing in, and the clothes were clean and dry above the hem. They were barefoot. Their shoes have never been found. They were not injured. Not a scratch, not a bruise, no scrapes on the arms or legs, which is close to impossible for anybody who has spent 9 days in October in that country, because you cannot walk 50 feet off a path in that hollow without greenbrier opening you up. They were not cold to the touch. Kaiser says this twice, that he put his hand on the arm of the nearer one, and she was warm, and that it surprised him so much that he did it again. They were not hungry. When he got them down to the house, which took him about 40 minutes because they walked slow, the first thing anybody did was put food in front of them, and neither of them ate anything, and one of them apologized for it, and they were holding hands. That is the detail that Kaiser leads with, and it is the detail that stayed in that county for 80 years. 2 girls standing in a creek at the head of a hollow, in the cold, holding hands, facing home, waiting. He asked them what they were doing. He said he asked them twice, and one of them said, and Kaiser was very clear that he did not know which one because nobody could tell them apart, and he said so in the statement. One of them said, "We are waiting for Mama to call us." Now, I have been telling this for a while, and I have been trying to keep the temperature even, but I want to stop here, because this is where the case turns from a strange thing into the thing it actually is, and if you miss what happens in the next 4 minutes, you will miss the whole point of the last 3 hours. Hester Nettle did not call her daughters names. She had 9 days. She had 60 men in her yard. She had a search across 2 districts. and in 14 statements taken by a justice of the peace from men and women who were on that farm around the clock for 9 days, watching a mother whose 2 children had disappeared. Not one of them ever heard her call their names. Okello noticed. He was not a stupid man. There is a line in his notes, and it is the sort of line a country justice of the peace writes when he has begun, quietly, to consider the possibility that the parents did it. Mother has not been heard to cry out for the children by name at any time. Is composed. 2 witnesses remark on it. She had read Petrie's journal. She had sat in a 2-room house at the head of the hollow and been told by a 91-year-old woman that the name is the whole of it, that you have to hand it over 3 times, meaning it, and she was a mother with 2 daughters missing in the woods in the cold, and the one single thing that every fiber of a body wants to do in that situation is stand at the edge of the trees and scream a name into them until your voice gives out. And she did not do it. For 9 days, not once. I do not know what that cost her. I have thought about it more than I would like to admit. I do not think there is a way to measure it. But there is one more thing in the record from those 9 days, and I have saved it, and here it is. On the 6th night, the 22nd of October, the night of the hard frost, a woman named Rutha Klein Vester stayed in the house with Hester Nettle because the women of that settlement were taking it in turns to sit with her. Rutha Vester was 44 years old, and she gave a statement on the 28th, and it is 9 lines long, and 8 of them are ordinary. The 9th is this. About the middle of the night, Mrs. Nettle got up and went to the door and stood at it. I asked her did she hear something, and she said no. She stood there, I would say, a quarter of an hour with her hand on the bar and did not lift it. Then she went and sat down and began counting backwards out loud from 87 and got to 1, and then began again from some other number, and went on so until day. I did not ask her about it. I have thought about it since. From 87, a number nobody in that house had said that day. She sat in the dark on the coldest night of the search, with her hand off the bar, and she counted backward until the sun came up. And on the 9th day, a boy on his way to fetch a mule brought both her daughters down out of the hollow, holding hands, warm, dry, unmarked, and not hungry, and standing in her yard in front of 30 people. And Hester Nettle came out onto that porch and did not say either of their names. She said, "Come in the house." Both of them came in. Now let me deal with the ordinary explanation, because there is one, and it is a good one, and it is what the county settled on, and it lasted 80 years. The explanation is that the girls ran off, or were taken by somebody, or wandered, and were sheltered somewhere for 9 days in a cabin, by a family in the next district, by somebody who did not know or did not care that a search was on and then came back or were brought back and were too frightened or too ashamed to say. That would account for the clean clothes and the lack of injury and the fact that they were not starving, and it would account for the shoes, because you take your shoes off in a house. That is a reasonable reconstruction. Okello wrote it into his final note, more or less, and closed the matter on the 9th of November, 1892, and the county has it in the book as "Children Returned," no cause of action, and I would let it stand there, and so would most people, except that this was not the first time, and Braddock County knew it was not the first time, and I have spent a long while assembling the list of the ones that came before, because Ottilie Craven said she had spoken to 11 families in 63 years, and said she had the names of 9 of them written in a book, and that book has never been found, but the 9 families can mostly be reconstructed from other paper. I am going to give you 4 of them, not all 9, 4, because 4 of them have enough documentation to be worth your time, and because the pattern in them is the thing that made me take this case seriously in the first place. The first is the Caywoods in 1868. And you already have most of it from Petrie's journal. A 6-year-old girl named Lovey Cawood lost 2 days in the ground back of the Nettle farm, and note that phrasing, because in 1868 the Nettles had not yet owned it, and it was still the Nettle farm, which is one of the small facts about this case that I find quietly unpleasant. Found unhurt, not hungry, asleep 30 hours afterward. And an elder woman of that household telling a preacher that the child had come back 4 paces ahead of herself. She died 14 months later, in January of 1869, and it was recorded as croup, and the man who preached her funeral wrote that he had buried a child that had no shadow on the snow. But here is what is not in the journal, and what I found in the county's own book, and it is one line in a marriage and death register. There were 2 Cawood children lost in 1868, not one. Lovey Cawood, aged 6, and an infant, unnamed in the register, listed as Inf. Dow. Cawood died the 20th of November, 1868, aged 11 days. 11 days old, died on the 20th of November, which is 6 days after Petrie sat down with the elder Mrs. Cawood and got the whole of the cosmology out of her. That family had lost a newborn while the preacher was in their house asking questions about the other one. There is the want. There is the hole. Every single one of these cases has a fresh grave in it, and it is always a small one. The second is a family named Tackett in 1878. Rufus Marion Tackett had a place on the far side of the ridge, about 1.5 miles from the head of Nettle Hollow, and in the spring of 1877 he lost his wife Marthy in childbirth, along with the child. That is documented in the county book, both of them on the same day, the 4th of May, 1877. And in November of 1878, Rufus Tackett walked off his place and was gone for 6 days, and was found, and this is in a newspaper, in the Ambler paper, in a 2-inch item under the heading, Lost on the Ridge, found on the 7th day, in good health and of sound mind, standing in a branch, and could give no account of the interval. Standing in a branch. 14 years before 2 11-year-old girls were found standing in a branch at the head of the same hollow, in the same posture, giving the same non-answer. Rufus Tackett sold out in 1879 and went to Kansas, and I have not been able to follow him past a land entry in Ellis County in 1881, and I would very much like to know how the rest of his life went, and I probably never will. The third one is the one that convinced me. In 1911, a man named Corb Rennick, the son of the Rennick, who had bought the lower field of the old Nettle place in 1906, hired a young fellow to help him get cattle off that pasture in the fall. The young fellow's name was Otho Vess Lyle, and he was 19 years old, and he was not from that district. He was from over near Fenner Junction, 16 miles off, and he had never heard any of it, because by 1911 nobody in Braddock County was telling it out loud anymore. He was on that place 11 days. On the 9th day he told Corb Rennick that he had heard a woman calling in the woods at the northeast corner, and Rennick told him to stay out of the northeast corner, and did not explain, because by then that was simply what people in that district said, and nobody explained it. On the 11th day, Otho Lyle quit and walked home 16 miles and did not collect his wages. And in 1922, 11 years later, Corb Rennick wrote a letter to the State Road Commission. This is the letter I mentioned earlier, the one about fencing off the corner on account of losses, and at the bottom of it, in a postscript, having already made his practical point about the road, he wrote a sentence that has no business being in a letter to a road commission. I will add that I have had 4 men work that upper field in 16 years, and 3 of them would not go back a second season, and I do not any longer ask them why, and I would take it as a kindness if the new road did not come nearer that corner than it has to. I would take it as a kindness if the new road did not come nearer that corner than it has to. That is a man in 1922, in a business letter to a state agency about pavement, asking the government to please keep away from a corner of his own pasture. And the fourth one is the one I cannot prove and will not stop thinking about. And it is the two families that left. Ottilie Craven said, 11 families, 9 stayed, 2 went. She wrote down the 9. She did not write down the 2, because the 2 did not need writing down. There is a family that left the Stillwater Fork District in 1851. Their name was Bohannon, and there were 7 of them, and they sold nothing and settled nothing and simply were not there in the 1860 census. And the reason we know they left in a hurry is that the store ledger at Stillwater Fork, a different store, an earlier one, which survives in fragments in a courthouse basement, carries a Bohannon account with a balance of $4.16 that was never paid and never pursued. In a settlement of 11 households where a fence line went to court over 11 feet, a storekeeper wrote off $4.16 and did not go after a family that everybody knew was 3 counties away. Ottilie Craven was 50 years old in 1851. That is exactly the sort of thing a woman keeping the account of a district remembers for the rest of her life as one of the 2 that got out. Now, all 4 of those cases have ordinary explanations, and I want to walk through them fast, because I promised you at the start that I would not hand you anything without testing it. Children died constantly in the 1860s. Lovey Cawood and an infant sister dying 14 months apart is not a pattern. It is a Tuesday in 1868. A man who lost his wife in childbirth walking off his farm for 6 days in 1878 is a man having a breakdown, and there was no word for it then and no help for it, and could give no account of the interval, is what a country newspaper printed instead of saying that a man had gone to pieces. A 19-year-old farmhand hearing a woman calling in the woods is a whip-poor-will, or a fox. And if you have never heard a fox scream at night, go and listen to a recording of it right now, and then tell me you would sleep. And a family skipping out on $4.16 in 1851 is a family skipping out on $4.16, every one of those, individually, perfectly reasonable. And then you lay them end to end across 140 years, 1851, 1868, 1878, 1892, 1911, 1922, and every single one of them happens within about 1.5 miles of the same 2/3 of a mile of shallow wooded draw, and in every single one of them, the person involved either had a fresh, small grave behind them, or was standing on ground where somebody else's was, and in 3 of them, the person was found standing in running water, giving no account of where they had been. That is not a haunted house. Haunted houses are a genre. This is something much duller and much worse. It is a place with a defect, and the defect has been sitting there behaving exactly the same way for as long as anybody has been keeping records, and it does not care who comes. Let me close this part out with 2 small things I have been carrying and have not put anywhere. The first is Dunk Sizemore. He kept that store until 1909. He took in a family of 5 in December of 1892 and put them in his lean-to for 4 months and never charged them, and he never once said out loud why. In 1904, he sat in a lawyer's office and was asked about that ground under oath, and said 11 words. I have nothing to say concerning that ground. He died in 1912, aged 87. And he is buried at Ambler, because his family moved the graves early, and that is worth noting, because his family moved him off that ground 41 years before the Corps of Engineers made everybody do it. And, in the settlement of his estate, among the store goods inventoried and sold at auction, there is a line item that made me put down my coffee the first time I read it. Matches, 61 boxes, unsold stock. 61 boxes of matches in a one-room store that served 11 households, at a nickel a box in a district where he had been the only supplier for 40 years. That is, $3.05 of the cheapest, fastest-turning, most stolen item in the whole inventory, sitting on a shelf at the end. He was not stocking matches for 11 households. He was stocking them for 11 households that all wanted more light than they were willing to explain to each other. And the second thing is the dog. I promised you bitters, and I do not want to leave him out, because in a story where I have handed you a great many bad endings, this is the one good one, and you have earned it. Bitters would not come in the yard from the middle of September until the afternoon of the 18th of October, 1892. Then he came in, and he slept in the house, and he was standing in the middle of the floor facing the door on the night of the 14th of December, and he did not bark, and he did not growl, which every account of that night agrees on, and which I have always thought was the single most frightening detail in it, because a dog that will not bark at a thing has already made a judgment about the thing. He went to Ohio in the wagon in April of 1893. He was, by Toll's account in 1934, an old fat dog by then and no use to anybody, and he lived another 5 years in a rented yard in Hamilton, Ohio, and died in 1898. And Toll Nettle, who was 20 years old, and a foundry hand, and had a wife coming in 6 years, and a composition book of tally marks ahead of him, buried him himself. And he told Hollis Pitt this in 1934, 41 years later, in a kitchen on Perrine Street, and Pitt typed it up without comment because he did not know what he had. He states the dog never afterward objected to any yard, house, room, or door in Ohio or anywhere else for the remainder of its life, and that the family took considerable comfort in this. Whatever it was, it did not follow them to Ohio in 1893. Not into the yard, anyway. Not where the dog could smell it. It waited 73 years, and then it came down a hallway in a residential home on the west side of Dayton on the 11th of March, 1966, and patted on a door at 2 feet off the floor, and said a name that only one person in the history of the world had ever used. There is one more piece of this that I want to put in front of you before we go on, and it is the smallest and the strangest, and it is the reason I believe that whatever the people of Stillwater Fork actually knew, they knew it in their bones and not in their heads. The schoolhouse at Stillwater Fork ran 3 months a year, and in 1939 a woman named Ollie Beth Rand Croucher, who had taught in that district from 1908 to 1926, contributed a page of children's rhymes and singing games to a state collection of schoolyard material, the sort of thing that gets gathered up and filed and never looked at again. Most of it is standard, counting out rhymes that turn up in 40 states, a jump rope chant, a ring game about a farmer, and there is one that is not standard, and it does not appear in any other collection I have been able to find from any state in any decade. Mrs. Croucher recorded it as a hand-clapping game played by girls, and she noted that it was played at this school only, so far as I know, and that the children called it going down. She wrote out the words, "There are 9 lines, and I am not going to chant it at you, because it is a children's rhyme and it is not spooky in the least, which is exactly the point. It is a counting rhyme. It goes from a number down to 1, and the number changes every time, because the rules of the game she wrote the rules down to are that the first girl picks a number in her head, does not say it, and starts, and the second girl has to come in on the next number down without being told, and if she comes in wrong, or if she comes in late, she is out. That is the game. That is the whole of it. Little girls in a 3-month schoolhouse in Braddock County, West Virginia, in the 1910s, clapping hands and testing each other on whether they could follow a number that had never been said out loud. Mrs. Croucher had no idea. She filed it as a hand-clapping game. She noted the tune, and that it was very old in this district, and that she had been told by an older woman that the girls had played it always. That is what folklore actually is, most of the time. It is not a story anybody tells. It is a rule that has outlived its reason and gone into the hands of children and gets played for 80 years by people who have no notion in the world what it was ever for. Somebody in that district, at some point in the 1800s, taught the children of Stillwater Fork to count backward from a number nobody had said. And I would give a great deal to know which of those little girls went home one evening in about 1914 and asked her grandmother where the game came from, and what the old woman said, and whether she said anything at all, or only looked at the child for a moment too long, and then told her to go and wash for supper. And then everybody who knew why died, and the children kept doing it, and they were still doing it in 1926. And it went into a state file as a schoolyard game, and it is sitting in that file right now. I have a copy of that page on my own desk as I record this, and the handwriting is a schoolteacher's handwriting, round and patient and quite untroubled, and there are 9 lines of it, and there is not one single word anywhere on it as to why, and in favor of it, I will point out the following. Nobody ever produced a shred of evidence for anything else. There was no ring of posts when the justice went to look. There was no swept ground. There is no physical object in this case that a person could pick up and be frightened by, except one. Which brings us, at last, back to a 51-year-old photographer from Zanesville, Ohio, sitting in a rented room in Parkersburg in the 3rd week of November, 1892, developing 11 weeks of plates. Alden Voss worked the way most of the traveling men worked. He shot dry plates, all summer gelatin dry plates, which by 1892 had almost entirely replaced the old wet collodion process, and which is a fact that matters more than it sounds, and I will come to why in a minute. He kept them in light, tight boxes, numbered, with a log, and at the end of the season he took a room somewhere with running water and a window he could black out, and he developed the whole summer at once, and then he printed, and then he mailed. His plate log survives because his nephew kept it. It went into a historical society in Ohio in 1931, along with about 400 of his plates, and part of that collection was transferred to a state archive in West Virginia in 1968 because of where the pictures were taken. That is the ordinary, boring, entirely documented path by which the strangest object in this case ended up in a drawer. The log entries for the 8th of August, 1892, read as follows. I am giving them to you exactly, abbreviations and all, and then I will translate. Aug 8. Nettle A. Braddock Co. W. Va. N-side Anders Knob. 3 PL. PD. 2.25. 411. FAM GRP on porch. 6 sec. F11. Overcast. 412. 2 girls at fence. 8 sec F11 overcast. 413. And then nothing. A dash. For the 3rd plate, there is no subject, no exposure, no aperture. There is a dash. That is the 3rd plate. That is what I have been holding back for 2 hours, and I am not going to tell you what is on it yet, because there is a reason the man could not write down what he had photographed, and the reason will not make sense to you until you have heard what happened when he developed number 412. He developed the summer's work between the 14th and the 21st of November, 430-odd plates, and he came to the Braddock County run on about the 19th. And on the 22nd of November, 1892, Alden Mercer Voss wrote a letter to Absalom Nettle at Stillwater Fork, Braddock County, West Virginia, and he did not send the prints with it. That letter survives. It survives because Absalom Nettle kept it, and Toll Nettle kept it after him, and it went into the same archive in 1968 with everything else. It is 2 pages. It is the letter of a professional man being extremely careful. He opens by apologizing for the delay. He explains that he develops at season's end. He hopes the family is well. And then he writes, "I must put a question to you before I send your prints, and I ask you to forgive the strangeness of it. On the plate of your 2 daughters standing at the fence, there is a fault which I cannot account for by any means known to me, and I have been at this trade 19 years. Both girls are sharp. The fence is sharp. The pasture and the tree line behind are sharp. The light is even, being an overcast day, and the exposure was 8 seconds. The girl on the left throws a shadow onto the ground to her right, as she ought, the sun being behind the cloud in the southwest at that hour. The girl on the right throws none. I do not mean it is faint. I do not mean it is lost in the grass. I mean the ground beside her is the same ground it is everywhere else in that frame, and there is nothing on it. I have examined the plate under a glass. I have printed it 3 times, twice on albumen and once on a gaslight paper at different exposures, to satisfy myself it is not a fault of the printing. It is in the negative. Sir, I have made likenesses of near 4,000 people, and I have seen every fault a plate can take. I have seen ghosts made by a man moving. I have seen a second head on a woman that turned. I know what a stray light does, and what a bad backing does, and what a fingerprint in the emulsion does. This is not any of them, and I say so plainly because if it were any of them, I would simply have thrown out the plate and printed you another, and said nothing at all. I ask you, therefore, was there any person or object standing between the girls and myself at that time? Was there anything upon the ground? Did either girl move? I ask, because I intend to print this plate for you if you want it, and I would sooner send it to you with an explanation than without one. And I will say to you honestly that if there is no explanation, I would rather you had the plate than I, for I have found in the last 3 days that I do not care to have it in the room where I sleep. Now, I want to spend some real time on the technical side, because this is a documentary, and because you deserve to have this tested rather than just handed to you in a spooky voice. Could a shadow be missing from an 1892 photograph for an ordinary reason? Yes, several ways. Let me go through them. The first is that there is no strong shadow to begin with. Overcast light is diffuse, and diffuse light makes soft, weak, spread-out shadows. That is real, and on a heavily overcast day, you might get almost nothing. But, and this is the whole point, it would be almost nothing for both girls. The failure mode of flat light is flat, everywhere in the frame, and Voss states plainly that the left-hand girl throws a shadow he can see and describe. You do not get one hard shadow and one absent shadow 8 feet away under the same cloud. There is no meteorology that does that. The second is movement. An 8-second exposure is a long time. If somebody sways, the image smears. But smearing does not remove a shadow, it blurs the person, and Voss says both girls are sharp, and he would know because a smeared subject was the single most common complaint in that trade, and he had been dealing with it for 19 years. The third is a plate fault, a coating flaw, a scratch, a chemical stain, a bit of dust on the emulsion. All of those are real, and all of those are common, but every one of them shows itself as something present in the wrong place, not something absent in exactly the right place. And a fault does not respect the outline of a person. If a patch of that plate had gone bad, the grass in that patch would be wrong too, and Voss specifically checked that. The ground beside her is the same ground it is everywhere else in the frame. The fourth is retouching. 19th century photographers retouched constantly, but retouching in 1892 on a glass negative meant working with pencil or dye on the varnish side, and it leaves traces that any competent examiner spots immediately, and the plate has been examined more than once, most recently in 1991, and no working on the negative was found. And the fifth possibility, the honest one, the one I cannot rule out, and neither can anybody else, is that the plate we have is not the plate Voss shot. that somewhere between 1892 and 1931, somebody made a copy, negative, doctored it, and put it back in the box because this was already a strange story in that county. And strange stories attract people who improve them. I cannot disprove that. Nobody can. What I can tell you is that the plate is on a glass stock consistent with the period, that its emulsion characteristics match the other Braddock County plates in the same box, that Voss's letter describing the anomaly is dated the 22nd of November, 1892, and is written on Parkersburg stationery in ink and hand, consistent with his other correspondence, and that the letter was in the possession of a family in Ohio, quietly, unmentioned, for 76 years before anybody outside that family ever knew it existed. If it is a hoax, it is a hoax that somebody set up in 1892 and then never once tried to profit from, and then hid for 3 generations. Now, here is the part that I find harder to get around than the plate. Absalom Nettle answered that letter. His reply does not survive. Voss's own papers are incomplete, but we know he answered, and we know roughly what he said, because Voss wrote a second letter on the 11th of December, 1892, and it survives, and it is 4 lines long. Sir, I have your letter of the 2nd. I have burnt nothing, and I will burn nothing, as you asked. I do not think a man ought to destroy the only true record of a thing merely because he does not like it, and I will say to you that I think in some years you may want it, whatever you feel now. I am sending you the family group, and I am keeping the other 2. If you write to me at Zanesville at any time, they are yours. I am sorry for your trouble. I have burnt nothing, and I will burn nothing, as you asked. Absalom Nettle wrote to a photographer in Ohio and asked him to destroy the plates. And the photographer said no, and kept them, and that decision won man's stubbornness about the record in December of 1892, is the only reason you and I are having this conversation at all. And the family group is the plate the Nettles got, and the plate that hung in a frame in a house in Dayton, Ohio, until 1971. And I want you to notice something about that group photograph, taken on the same afternoon, minutes apart, with the same camera and the same light. 6 people on a porch roof over all of them, which means every one of them is in shade, which means there is not a shadow in the entire frame. Voss shot the family group first. If he had shot it second, he would never have noticed anything at all, because a porch has no shadows to be missing. The whole of this case rests on the order in which a man on a summer afternoon decided to take 2 pictures. So let us go back up the hill to the last week of October, 1892, and a family with 2 daughters home again, and a search wound down, and 60 men gone back to their own corn. The girls were fine. I want to say that plainly, because it is true, and because it is the strangest sentence in the whole account. From the 25th of October, they were fine. The one who had not eaten since August ate. That night, a full plate and more the next morning. Toll said she ate like a field hand for a week, and his mother kept putting it in front of her and watching her eat it with an expression he could not describe at 14 and could not describe at 56 either. She was warm. Ruth of Esther, who came up on the 27th to see how they were, put her hand on the girl's forehead, the way women did, and reported that she was warm as toast. Verity chewed the inside of her cheek. Corinne rocked heel to heel at the washpot. Both of them, the old way, the way they had done since they were 4 years old. And on the 29th of October, at 20 minutes past noon, under a clear sky, Hester Nettle sent her daughters out into the middle of the yard to shake out a quilt, and went and stood on the porch with a ball of string, 2 shadows, both of them the same length. She measured, twice, with the string, on the 29th of October and again on the 30th, and they matched to within the width of her thumb, and she wrote nothing to her sister about it, because she was not writing to her sister any more. The trouble was over. And I want you to hold that feeling for a second, the actual, human, enormous relief of it, because the family held it for about 3 weeks, and because what comes next only makes sense if you understand that by the middle of November 1892, that house had begun to breathe again. Absalom took the bar off the door in the daytime. Hester started a quilt. Toll went back to school. On the 2 days a week it was running. And here is the thing that nobody in that house said out loud, and that Toll Nettle finally said out loud in a kitchen in Ohio 42 years later. Nobody ever asked the girls where they had been. 9 days. 2 11-year-old girls. And in the 4 months that family spent under that roof afterward, not one person in it ever asked the question. Ora Kellogg asked, on the 27th of October, formally, and got an answer I will give you in a moment. But their mother never asked. Their father never asked. Their brother never asked. Toll told Hollis Pitt, we did not want to know. I have thought about that all my life, and that is the honest reason. It was over, and we did not want to know. The answer they gave Ora Kellogg is in his notes, and it is 8 words. He asked them where they had been for 9 days, and one of them said, we were where there was room for us. He wrote it down, and he did not follow up on it, because, to a justice of the peace in 1892, that is a confused child saying something meaningless, and he had a docket, and the matter was closed. Now, the 14th of December. The winter came in hard in the first week of December, 1892, with snow on the 4th that stayed. Absalom was hauling wood. Toll was helping. The days were 9.5 hours long, and the nights were the rest of it. On the night of the 14th of December, at an hour Toll put at somewhere after midnight, the family woke to a sound at the door. Not a knock, the sound of a small hand on wood, patting. Low down on the door, about 2 feet off the floor. The way a very small child pats at a door they are not tall enough to knock on. And under it, very faint, a hum. One note, low, flat, contented. Nobody moved. Toll said he lay there and could hear his own heart in the mattress. Bitters, who had been sleeping in the house since the search, got up and went and stood in the middle of the floor and did not bark, did not growl, did not go to the door. Just stood in the middle of the room and looked at it, and then, from outside the door, in the dark, at 2 feet off the ground, a voice said, Toll, Toll, I told you 3 things about a 2-year-old girl, that she hummed while she ate, that she was frightened of the pump handle, and that she could not say her brother's name, and so she called him Toll, Toll. The only people in the world who knew that were the 5 people in that room. And Toll Nettle, 14 years old, lying on a pallet in the dark, did the thing that saved his family. And he did it not out of courage, but because he had been sitting on a step outside a 2-room house at the head of a hollow in October with the door open, listening. He started counting backward, out loud, from 63. He said he picked 63 because it was the number of years the old woman had said she had been keeping the account, and it was the only number in his head. And he counted down, out loud, in the dark, 63, 62, 61, and he said that the thing on the other side of that door counted with him. That is what he told Hollis Pitt. It counted with him. In his sister's voice, the small one, the dead one, the one who could not say a 3-syllable name, it counted with him, and it was right for a while. And then at about the 40s, it started to come in a half-beat late, and then it started getting them wrong. Not random, he said. That was the awful part. It was not saying numbers at random. It was saying the number he had said before last. It was following, and then it stopped, and there was nothing at the door. And Hester Nettle got out of bed. Absalom said her name. Toll said his father said her name the way he had said it twice before, low, flat, the hoarse voice, and that it did not work this time. She crossed the floor. She put her hand on the bar, and she said, out loud, to the door, Ruth Ann, that is 1. Toll said the room went so quiet that he could hear the snow coming off the roof, and on the other side of the door a small voice said, "Mama," and Hester Nettle said, "Ruth Ann, baby, that is, 2." Now I want to stop the tape right here, because this is the moment the entire 3 hours has been walking toward, and because I do not want anybody listening to this to think, even for a second, that Hester Nettle was weak, or foolish, or that she had not been warned, or that she did not know exactly what she was doing. She knew. She had read Patrie's journal cover to cover by one lamp. She had been told to her face by Ottilie Craven that it is not the word, it is the meaning behind the word, 3 times and it is done, and you done it. She had gone 9 days with 2 daughters lost in the woods in October, and had never once let a name out of her mouth. She knew precisely what the 3rd one would cost, and she stood at that door on the 14th of December, 1892, with her hand on a piece of white oak, and on the other side of 2 inches of pine was the sound of a child she had buried, saying, "Mama," and she had already said the name twice, and she had one more in her. What stopped her was not her husband. Absalom Nettle was out of the bed by then, and Toll said he was standing 8 feet behind her, and he did not touch her, and I have always thought that was because he knew that if he laid a hand on her arm, she would have said it out of pure reflex. What stopped her was her son. Toll Nettle, from his pallet on the floor, in the dark, said, 14, just the number. The next one down. He picked the count back up where the thing had lost it, and he said it out loud into that room, and his mother stopped with her mouth open and turned around and looked at him. And he said, 13, 12, 11, and she stood there. And he said, "Mama, 10. And Hester Nettle took her hand off the bar and came across the floor and got down on the floor beside her son and counted with him. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then she started again from some other number. And Toll said they went on that way until it got light, mother and son on the floor of a cabin in Braddock County, counting down out loud from numbers nobody in that house had said that day, with a barred door and one lamp out, and a dog standing in the middle of the room facing it. And at some point in the small hours the patting started again, and then stopped, and then at about 4 in the morning something walked away from that door across frozen ground, and Absalom Nettle heard it, and Toll heard it, and Hester heard it, and none of them ever agreed afterward on how many sets of footsteps it was. In the morning there was nothing in the yard, no tracks, 9 inches of old snow and a crust on it, and not one mark from the door to the gate. That is the night it almost happened. The 11th of December is when the second letter from Ohio arrived. The 14th of December is when Hester Nettle got to 2, and there was never a third. And I want to tell you why. And it is not because they were brave. It is because at first light, on the 15th of December, 1892, Absalom Nettle hitched the wagon, put his wife and his 3 children in it, and I will come back to the word 3, I promise you I will, and drove down that grade to the store at Stillwater Fork and asked Dunk Sizemore to keep them until he could sell the place. Dunk Sizemore took them in. He gave them the lean-to behind the store, which was maybe 12 by 16, and had a stove in it, and 5 people lived in it for 4 months, and he never charged them a cent, and there is no record of him ever telling anybody why. He never spoke of that ground. He had said so in 1892, and he was still saying it in 1904 to a lawyer under oath. But he took them in on a December morning without asking a question, which tells you that he did not need to ask one. The farm did not sell. I want to be exact about this because it is a matter of public record, and because it is, in its dry way, the most damning document in the entire case. Absalom Nettle owned 41 acres in fee simple, with a house, a barn, a crib, a smokehouse, an orchard of about 30 apple trees, water on the property, and roughly 9 acres in cleared bottom. In 1893, in Braddock County, that was worth somewhere between $400 and $600. He advertised it in the Ambler paper in January, February, and March of 1893. He dropped the price twice. The last advertisement, on the 9th of March, 1893, offers the whole of it house, barn, 41 acres, standing timber for $140, cash or terms. Nobody bought it. Not a soul in Braddock County. In a decade when men were clearing new ground with a mattock because they could not afford cleared ground, would put $140 on 41 acres with a house on it. The taxes went unpaid in 1894. The county took it in 1897 and put it up at the courthouse door in Ambler, and it did not sell there either. It went back on the books. Part of it was finally sold in 1906 to a man named Rennick, who ran cattle on the lower field, and who this is documented in a letter to the State Road Commission in 1922, fenced off the Sta, northeast corner, on account of losses, and never grazed it. The house stood empty until it fell. There is a photograph of it, taken by a Farm Security Administration man in 1937 in a completely different context, as part of a survey of rural housing conditions, and the man had no idea what he was photographing. It is a collapsed roof, and a standing chimney, and a locust tree. In the background, you can see the mouth of the hollow, and in 1954, the Corps of Engineers put a flood control impoundment on the Little Sang, and Nettle Hollow is under about 60 feet of water, and has been for 72 years. I am going to come back to that at the very end, because there is one more thing about that lake, and it is small, and it is the last thing I have got. Now, the 15th of April, 1893. The Nettles left. They went to Ohio. That was the road out of that country, and half the county eventually took it. Absalom had a cousin at Hamilton, and there was foundry work, and a man of 40 could get on. They loaded what they had into a hired wagon at Stillwater Fork and drove to the railhead at Fenner Junction, 31 miles, and that is the last day any of them ever spent in Braddock County, West Virginia. Two things happened on that morning, and both are in the record. The first is that Ottilie Craven walked down from the head of the hollow, 91 years old, a mile and a quarter of bad track, in April, to stand in the road in front of a store and see a family off. Toll remembered what she said, and it is the last thing anybody ever recorded her saying, because she died in the following winter, in February of 1894, at 92. She said to Hester Nettle, "I will not write your name in the book." And then she said, and this is the part Toll repeated twice to Hollis Pitt, because he wanted it taken down right, she said, "Do not come back for the graves, not ever. It will use a grave." Hester Nettle left a 2-year-old daughter in the churchyard at Stillwater Fork and got on a wagon and never came back. And if you want to know what this thing actually cost people, it is not the fright, and it is not the 9 days. It is that. The second thing is the one I said I would come back to. There is a statement in the county file, not from the search, from later, from 1898, when a man named Cottrell was trying to establish a boundary, and old testimony was being collected about who had been where and when. And a woman named Dosia Pruitt Ames, who kept a house at the crossroads a half-mile from Stillwater Fork, was asked to fix a date, and she fixed it by the Nettles leaving, because everybody in that district fixed dates by the Nettles leaving. And in the course of that, in a sentence that is not about anything, that is just a woman placing herself in time, she says, "I was on my porch, and I seen them go by, the man driving and the woman up beside him and the 4 children in the back among the goods." 4 children. There were 3. Tolliver, Verity, Corinne. Ruth Ann had been in the churchyard for 2 years and 2 months. Now a woman across a road, in April, at a distance, glancing at a loaded wagon going past, 5 years before she gave the statement, miscounting children among a pile of household goods. That is nothing. That happens I would not put $1 on the count of anything I glanced at from a porch 5 years ago. I am telling you because it is in the file. I am telling you because I said at the start of this that I would give you what is there and let you do what you want with it. And I am telling you because I have read that sentence probably 200 times and I cannot make it stop meaning something. Let me give you what became of them, one at a time, because the aftermath of this case is longer than the case, and in some ways it is worse. Absalom Nettle worked in a foundry at Hamilton, Ohio, and then in Dayton, and he died there on the 2nd of March, 1919, at the age of 65, of what the certificate calls chronic bronchitis, which was what the certificate called foundry lungs. He barred his door every night for 26 years, in 2 rented houses and 1 company duplex in a city with electric streetlights and a police force. His son said he cut a new bar for every place they lived, always white oak if he could get it, and hung 2 iron staples inside the frame, and that landlords complained about the staples, and that he paid for the damage every time without argument, and did it again at the next house. Hester Nettle died on the 11th of November, 1901, at Dayton, Ohio, aged 45. The certificate says heart failure. Toll said in 1934 that his mother was never sick a day and went to bed one night and did not wake up, and that she had been sitting up at night for 8 years by then, and that his father found her in the morning with the lamp still burning. 1 lamp, always 1. She kept that rule to the last night of her life. And Toll said one more thing about his mother that I have not been able to get out of my head since the first time I read it, and I am going to give it to you exactly as Hollis Pitt typed it in 1934. He states that after they came to Ohio, his mother would not say the name of the youngest child that died in 1891 at any time or for any reason. He states that she did not say it at his father's table in 11 years. He states that she wrote it when she had to write it, and that once he saw her write it on a piece of paper and then hold the paper in the stove door until it was gone. He states, she had 2 left in her, and she was not going to spend them. She had 2 left in her. She had said it twice at a door in December of 1892, and she believed for the rest of her life that the count was still running, and that there were 2 on the ledger against her, and that if she ever said that name a 3rd time and meant it, something would be owed. 9 years. She held that for 9 years, and then she died in her sleep with a lamp burning. And now, the twins. And this is the part where I have to be more careful than I have been anywhere else tonight, because 2 real people lived 70 years past this, and I am not going to tell you which one of them was which, because nobody knows, and because both of the possibilities are somebody's grandmother. Here is the first thing, and it is the quiet horror at the center of the rest of their lives. After October of 1892, nobody could tell them apart, ever again. Not by face, nobody ever could. But before that autumn, there had been a system, and the system worked, and everybody in that family used it 100 times a day without thinking about it. Verity chewed the inside of her cheek. Corinne rocked heel to heel. After the 25th of October, 1892, they both did both. Toll told Hollis Pitt that from the time they came down out of that hollow, both of his sisters chewed the inside of the cheek, and both of them swayed at the washpot, and that his mother sorted them for the rest of her life by making them speak because their voices were a shade different, and that his father sorted them by which side of the table they sat on, and that after his mother died in 1901, there were periods of weeks when he was not certain, in his own head, which sister he was talking to, and that he never once asked, because you cannot ask that. They went by their names. They answered to them. Nobody in that family ever tested it. Verity Nettle never married. She worked as a seamstress in Dayton, in a shop on 3rd Street, and she lived with her father, and by every account she was good company and quick with a joke, and had a great many friends among the women she worked with. She died on the 9th of June, 1903, aged 22 years and 3 months. The death certificate gives the cause as inanition, which is the old word for wasting for a body that is not taking nourishment. The attending physician, a Dr. Ellsworth Tarrant, added a note, because doctors did that then, and the note is in the county book at Dayton, and it reads, "Patient declined food some 3 weeks. No obstruction found, and no disease of stomach or bowel that I could discover. She was in good flesh and good color until the last 2 days. I cannot give a satisfactory account of this case. She was in good flesh and good color. 3 weeks without eating, and she did not lose weight, and then she died anyway. I do not have anything clever to say about that. I have read it a great many times, and the only thing I ever come away with is that a man named Tarrant, who had no idea what he was writing down, wrote down the exact same anomaly that a farm woman had described to her sister in a letter 11 years earlier and 400 miles away. Corinne Nettle married a man named Emery Bright Farron in 1901 when she was 20. He was a machinist. They had 6 children, 5 of whom lived, and they moved to Springfield, Ohio in 1911, and she was widowed in 1944, and she died on the 2nd of August, 1962, at the age of 81, in her own bed, in her own house, with a granddaughter in the room. By any measure at all, she had a good life. I want that said. 81 years, 5 children, 13 grandchildren, a garden that people in that neighborhood apparently talked about. Whatever came out of Nettle Hollow did not get everything. But there are 2 things about Corinne Nettle Farron. The first is that she would not be photographed. Not ever. Not once. From 1892 to 1962. Not at her own wedding. There are wedding pictures from that day, and she is not in any of them, and the family story was always that she had been ill. Not with her children. Not with her grandchildren. Not at a funeral. Not at a reunion. Not at a 50th anniversary. 70 years. Her granddaughter, Ada Farron Cousins, was interviewed in 1979 by a graduate student named Marion Devers Alt, who was doing fieldwork on family folklore in the Ohio Valley, and that interview is on tape, and it has been transcribed, and it is the last first-hand voice in this whole story. Ada Cousins was 61 in 1979. She had been in the room when her grandmother died, and she said this, "You did not point a camera at Grandma Farron. It was not a rule anybody made. You just knew it, the way you knew not to whistle in her kitchen. My cousin brought a brownie to Thanksgiving one year. This would be 1930-something, and he did not point it at her, and he was 9 years old. Nobody had told him. You just knew. I asked her about it one time. I was maybe 15. And she said, 'Honey, I have been in one picture in my life, and it was enough.' And I said, 'What picture?' And she said, 'The one where they can count us. The one where they can count us.'" Now the second thing about Corinne Farron, and I have gone back and forth about whether to include it, because it is the one piece of this case that I cannot document to my own satisfaction, and I am going to tell you that up front instead of at the end. There is supposed to be a photograph from 1948. The story, and it comes from the same 1979 interview, from Ada Cousins, who was 30 in 1948, and says she was there, is that at a family wedding in Springfield, Ohio, in June of 1948. A photographer hired for the occasion took a picture of a group on a lawn without asking, the way hired photographers do, and that Corinne Farron, then 67 years old, was standing at the end of that group in full afternoon sun. Ada Cousins says she saw the print. She says her mother had it. She says that when it came back from the developer, everyone in that group threw a shadow onto the grass, long ones, because it was late afternoon in June, and that at the end of the row there was Grandma Farron, and there was nothing on the grass beside her. And she says her mother put that print in the kitchen stove, and that nobody in the family ever discussed it again, including the two of them. Marion Alt, to her credit, asked the obvious question on the tape. She asked whether anybody else had seen it. And Ada Cousins said her mother had, and her mother was dead. And Alt asked whether it could have been the printing, or a fold, or a shadow falling on a walkway instead of grass. And Ada Cousins said, and you can hear on the tape that she is not annoyed, she is just tired. It could have been. I would like it to have been. I am 70 years past being able to prove anything to you about my own grandmother, and I have got to live in this family, and I am telling you what I saw, because you asked me, and because there is nobody left. It can hurt. So, no print, no negative, one witness, at 8 to 1 years removed from the original events and 31 years removed from the photograph, in a family that had been carrying this thing for 3 generations and that had every reason in the world to see what it expected to see. I put it to you as testimony and not as evidence, and I would ask you to weigh it that way. Which is exactly what I would say about the whole of this case if the plate did not exist. But the plate does exist. That is the thing that will not go away. Everything else in this account is a document about a document, a memory of a conversation, a woman on a porch counting children in a wagon. And then there is a piece of glass in a drawer in Charleston, coated in 1892, exposed for 8 seconds by a professional on the 8th of August of that year, which has been examined 4 times in the last 90-odd years by people who wanted very much to find a stray light, or a fingerprint, or a retoucher's pencil, and which shows 2 girls at a fence and 1 shadow. Which brings me to the boy. Tolliver Nettle was 14 years old on the 14th of December, 1892, when he said 14 into the dark of that cabin and stopped his mother's hand on the bar. He lived another 79 years, and I want to tell you about those 79 years properly, because in a case full of dead children and burned photographs and a lake over the top of everything, the actual long-term evidence in this thing is a man in Ohio, and what he did every night, and what he never once explained to anybody until he was 56 years old and a stranger from a state office knocked on his door. He went to work at 15, foundry, then the railroad. Then, in 1909, he got on with a company in Dayton that made cash registers, and he stayed there for 36 years and retired as a floor supervisor in 1945 with a pension and a watch. He married a woman named Belva Arun Sisk in 1904. They had 3 children. She died in 1958. By every measure that a life gets measured by, Toll Nettle had an ordinary, decent, entirely unremarkable American century. Here is what was underneath it. He barred his door. Every night, from the age of 14 until the night he died, his own children grew up thinking every house in America had a piece of oak across the door, and his son, Absalom. Ross Nettle, named for his grandfather, said in a letter in 1972 that he had been 11 years old before he understood that other fathers did not do it. He would not have 2 lamps lit in a room. Not 2 lamps, not 2 candles, and after 1922, when the house was wired, not 2 lights. His daughter-in-law said he would come into a room where somebody had a floor lamp and a table lamp burning, and he would turn one off without breaking off what he was saying, and turn it off in someone else's house too, and apologize, and do it again the next time. He never had his photograph taken willingly, but he did not make a scene about it the way his sister did. He simply arranged for 60 years never to be standing in a group when a camera came out. There are 4 photographs of him in existence, and in 3 of them he is indoors, and he counted, out loud, backward, in the night, when something woke him. His wife said, in the only account of it from inside that marriage, a note she wrote to her sister in 1931, and which survives in the same family collection that in 27 years she had learned to sleep through. And that it never lasted more than a few minutes, and that she had asked him about it exactly once in the first year, and he had told her the truth, and she wrote, "I did not believe him. I want to put down that I did not believe him, and that he knew I did not, and that he never brought it up again, and never once put out about it. But I will say this, I have never seen him get to one and stop. He always starts over from another number 2 or 3 times, and then he sleeps. Whatever he thinks he is doing, he thinks it is worth doing right. Whatever he thinks he is doing, he thinks it is worth doing right." Now, 1934. Hollis Reader Pitt. Hollis Pitt was 38 years old in 1934, and he was employed by a federal relief program that put unemployed white-collar people to work, collecting oral history and folklore. It was real work, and it produced an enormous amount of the material we have about that generation, and most of the men and women doing it were school teachers and reporters who had lost their jobs in the crash. Pitt was in Dayton in September of 1934, collecting material from families who had come up out of the Virginias and Kentucky. He was not looking for this. He was collecting ballads, remedies, weather signs, and stories about the old country. And somebody at a church supper told him that there was an old fellow named Nettle from Braddock County who might know something, and gave him an address. And he knocked on a door on Perrine Street on a Tuesday afternoon. Toll Nettle was 56. He let him in. And here is what I cannot explain and what I think about more than anything else in this case. He talked for 2 afternoons, about 6,000 words, to a stranger with a notebook, 42 years after the fact, having never told his own wife more than a sentence of it. I have a theory about why, and it is only a theory, and it is this. Pitt's own field notes, which are in the same folder, contain a line about their first meeting, written that evening, and it is a throwaway line, an interviewer's note about a source's demeanor. Subject asked me twice whether the state would keep the papers. I said the state keeps everything. He said, "Then I will tell it. The state keeps everything." He was 56 years old. His mother was dead. His father was dead. One sister was dead. His other sister would not have her picture taken. Everybody who could confirm any of it was gone or silent. And a man from the government sat down in his kitchen with paper and told him that whatever he said would be kept. I think Toll Nettle had been waiting 42 years for somewhere to put it down. Now, the 2 struck-through words. I told you at the top of the second hour that I would come back to them. The typescript is a carbon copy, and it has been corrected in ink in 2 places. In one place, a date is fixed. In the other, near the end of the second afternoon, there is a passage where Toll is describing the night of the 14th of December, and the sentence as typed reads, he states that he called out a number, and that his mother turned from the door, and that the words struck never came into the house. 2 words, struck through so heavily that the letters underneath are not recoverable. The archive tried, in 1988, with the technology of the time, and got nothing. It has not been attempted since, as far as I know, and I would very much like it to be. Here is what I can tell you about those 2 words. The strike-through is in ink, and the correction to the date on page 4 is also in ink, and both are in the same ink, and the hand that struck out those 2 words is not Hollis Pitt's hand. It is a comparison anybody can make, because the archive folder contains a note in Pitt's hand and a signed receipt in Toll Nettle's hand from the same week, acknowledging that he had read the transcript. He read it, and he signed for it. And somewhere between reading it and signing for it, Tolliver Nettle took a pen and put out 2 words about what did not come into the house on the 14th of December, 1892, and left everything else in this document standing, every word about the shoe, the hum, his mother at the door, the counting, all of it. He let all of that go into the state's keeping. Those 2 words he took back. I have my own guess about what they were. It is worth exactly nothing, and I am going to keep it to myself, because this case has been improved by too many people already, and I am not going to be one of them. Now, let me take you to the last part, and it is 1966, and there is one more witness. Nettle went into a residential home on the west side of Dayton in 1964, at the age of 86, after a fall. It was a converted house with 14 residents. The kind of place that existed by the thousand before nursing homes were regulated into what they are now. He was there for 7 years, and in the file that came out of that place when it closed in 1978. And this file exists because a state inspection turned up record-keeping problems, and the paperwork was preserved by an attorney there. Our night shift notes. And a night attendant named Delphine Amos Ruddle, who worked there from 1965 to 1970, wrote a series of them about the man in room 4. Most of it is ordinary, sleeps poorly, refuses the second lamp, requires the door of his room to be closed, and will not accept it being propped. Counts at night, staff advised not to interrupt. And then, on the 11th of March, 1966, there is a longer one, and it is the last real scene in this story. I am going to read it to you close to whole. The 11th of March, 2066, Res. #4 Nettle, up at approx 1:40 a.m., found standing at his door with hand on the knob, awake and oriented. Asked him, did he need the toilet? He said no. He said, "There is a child in this hall?" I said, "There is no child here, Mr. Nettle. This is a home for older people." He said, "I know it." He said, "There is a child in this hall, and she has been in it since Tuesday." He asked me to go and look. I went and looked down the hall both ways. There was nothing in the hall. I told him so. He said, "Did you see anything of mine on the floor?" I said, "No, there is nothing on the floor." He said, "All right, and thank you," and he shut his door. About 2:15 I heard him counting. It was louder than usual, and it went on some while. It went backwards from 80-something. He got down to about 20, and then he stopped, and I heard him say a name. Then he started over from another number. I went to the door at about 3 and knocked and asked, was he all right? He said through the door, "I am all right. Do not come in, and do not open this door until it is light, and do not answer anybody in this hall tonight, whatever they say to you." I did not open the door. I want to state that I checked on him by voice 3 times, which is per procedure. At 6:40 a.m., I went in with his tray, and he was sitting up on the side of the bed dressed. He had put his chair against the door in the night, which he is not supposed to do. He said to me, "Delphine, I am sorry about last night. I am an old man, and I have got an old man's head." And I said, "That is all right, Mr. Nettle." And he said, "But I am going to tell you one thing anyway, and then I will not bring it up again." He said, "If you are ever somewhere, and you hear somebody call you by a name that only one person ever called you, you do not answer it, not once." He said, "You can be as polite as you want about it in your head, but you do not say a word out loud." I said, "All right, Mr. Nettle." He said, "That is all." And he ate his breakfast and was in good spirits the remainder of my shift. She wrote that down at 7 o'clock in the morning on a form meant for recording whether the residents had slept. He was 88 years old. He had been in that home for 2 years, in a city 700 feet above the water, covering a hollow 400 miles away, and he had a chair against the door, and he was counting backward from 80-something, and he told a night attendant not to answer to a name that only one person ever used. You know what the name was. There was only ever one person in the world who called him Tol, and the note says he got to about 20, and then he stopped and said a name. He stopped the count and said a name. Delphine Ruddle did not write down which one, and she was deposed about it in 1979 for a completely unrelated licensing matter and asked about her notes, and she said she did not remember, and it had been 13 years. And I believe her. Tolliver Nettle died on the 29th of January, 1971, at the age of 93 of pneumonia. In that same home, in that same room. The last entry about him in the night notes is from a different attendant, and it says he was quiet. And now I am going to tell you what was in his room, because a man's effects are the closest thing this world offers to a verdict. There were his clothes and his watch, and a photograph of his wife, and a Bible he had been given at his marriage in 1904. There was a piece of white oak, 31 inches long, cut to the width of the door of a room in a residential home in Dayton, Ohio, with 2 iron staples wrapped in a handkerchief. The home had not permitted him to install them. He had cut the bar anyway and kept it under the bed for 7 years. There was a tin box, the kind that held tobacco, and in it were 3 things. The first was a letter on Parkersburg stationery dated the 22nd of November, 1892, from a photographer, asking a question about a shadow. The second was a ledger book with marbled boards, 61 pages written on, the flyleaf reading Isham Quill Petrie, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a shoelace, which means Hester Nettle took it out of that county in a wagon in April of 1893 and never gave it back to the church, and her son had it for 78 years. And the third was a child's shoe. Left foot, soft sole, 1 button at the ankle, size to fit about a 2-year-old. 1 shoe, not the pair. There is no record of what happened to the other one, and the last documented location of the other one is the bottom of a corn crib under 40 bushels of corn on a farm in Braddock County, West Virginia, in October of 1892, and that farm is under a lake. He kept the left one, the one that was standing under the pump. And there was one more item, and it was not in the box. It was in the drawer of the nightstand, and it was a school composition book, the kind you could buy for a nickel, and it was full. Tally marks, 4 vertical strokes and a 5th across. Groups of 5, in rows, in pencil and in pen, and in 3 different colors of ink over the years, filling every line of every page of a composition book of 96 pages. His son counted them in 1971 because his son was an accountant by then, and that is what an accountant does with a book full of marks when his father has died and he does not know what else to do with his hands. He counted them twice. He wrote the number on the inside of the back cover, 28,409. Toll Nettle lived from the 14th of December, 1892, the night at the door, to the 29th of January, 1971. That is 28,513 days. 28,409 tally marks. 28,513 days. He missed 104. I do not know what the marks were. Nobody does. There is no legend in the book, no date, no heading, not one word of writing in 96 pages except a number in his son's hand on the inside of the back cover. But I will tell you the 3 possibilities, the same way I did with the posts in the hollow, and then I will tell you which one I think it is. 1. He counted the days, a man marking off a life, which people do, and which means nothing. 2. He counted the nights he was woken, 104 undisturbed nights in 78 years, which would be a kind of horror all its own. And 3. He counted the nights he got to 1, the nights he started from a number nobody had said, and went down, out loud, all the way to 1, and nothing counted along with him, and nothing followed a half beat behind, and nothing padded low down on the door at 2 feet off the floor. A mark for every night the lantern showed him nothing. I think it is the 3rd one, and I think it is the 3rd one, because of what Belva Nettle wrote in 1931, that he always started over from another number 2 or 3 times, and then slept. And because of what Isham Patry wrote in a church cellar journal in 1870, it is not a defense, it is a lantern. It shows you the thing. It does not stop the thing. You do not tally a defense. You tally a result. 28,409 nights. He lit the lantern, and there was nothing there. And 104 nights, he did not make a mark. There was one more thing in that composition book. Folded in the back, in his own handwriting, undated but written with an unsteady hand, so probably late, probably in that room, probably in the years after 1964. It is 11 lines. It is the last document in this case, and it is the only one in which Tolliver Nettle explains himself. To whoever gets this, there is nothing wrong with me, and there never was. I have not been a nervous man. I have worked 36 years for one company and raised 3 children, and I have never once in my life seen a thing that was not there. I saw one thing that was there, and everybody would rather I had not. I want to put down that I do not know what it was, and I am not going to guess. I have heard it called every name people call things, and none of the names fit it. It is not the devil. It has got no more interest in your soul than a river has. It is only that there is ground in this world that has got a bad habit, and my mother's want stood on it, and it learned her want, and it has been at that door ever since. I want to put down that my mother did not do anything wrong. She said the name twice. Anybody would have said it 20 times. She was the strongest person I have ever known in my life, and I have never told anybody that. And I want to put down the one thing I know for certain, which is this. It is patient beyond anything you can hold in your head. It waited on that ground before there was a county. It waited 9 days in the cold for my sisters. It has waited on me 70-some years, and it is not tired. Bar the door. 1 lamp. Count backward from a number you have not said, and go all the way down, and do not stop in the middle for anything. And if you hear it counting with you, keep going, and do not answer. Not once. It only wants 1 word. That is the whole of it. Now, the 3rd plate. I have made you wait almost the entire length of this for it. And I want to tell you why before I tell you what is on it, because the why is part of the thing. Alden Voss's plate log for the 8th of August, 1892, records 3 plates paid for and gives full technical details for 2. The family group at 6 seconds, the 2 girls at the fence at 8 seconds, both at F11 under overcast. And for number 413, there is a dash. For 19 years, in 400-odd surviving log pages, Alden Voss never once left a subject line blank. He recorded exposures for plates he knew were failures. He recorded exposures for plates he dropped. There are entries in that log that read, "Spult, dog, and ruined, sun out, and lady moved, refunded." A dash appears once, and it appears there because, and this is from a 3rd letter, written in 1893, not to the Nettles, but to his brother in Zanesville, and preserved with his papers. Alden Voss did not know he had made a 3rd exposure. He wrote to his brother, "I have gone over the day in my mind 100 times. I made the group on the porch, and I made the 2 girls at the fence, and the man paid me for 3. And I have got it wrote down that he paid for 3, and I cannot for the life of me remember making the 3rd, nor where I stood. I have found in the box a plate numbered in my own hand 413 in the place where it belongs in the order, so I made it. And I made it after the girls at the fence, and before I packed the wagon, because that is what the numbering means. And my numbering has never once been wrong in 19 years. I have developed it. Jessie, I am not going to write down what is on it. I will show it to you when I come at Christmas, and you may tell me what you think then, and if you tell me I ought to break it, I will consider it. But I do not think I will break it." He did not break it. It went to his nephew and to the Ohio Historical Society in 1931, and to the West Virginia State Archive in 1968, and it is in a drawer in Charleston in a folder with the family group and the two girls at the fence, and it has been printed perhaps a dozen times in 134 years, and I have seen a print of it. Here is what is on plate 413. It is the same frame as plate 412. The same fence, the same pasture, the same tree line, the same angle, the same distance Voss set up on a tripod, and he did not move it between the two, and you can tell because the fence post at the left edge is cut by the frame in exactly the same place in both. The two girls are standing at the fence, in the same dresses, in the same positions, in the same light. In this one, both of them cast a shadow. Two girls, two shadows, on the grass, going the same direction, the same length, exactly as the sun and the cloud and the hour of the afternoon require. That is the second plate corrected. That is the photograph that should have existed. And if that were all, this would be a story about a plate fault after all, and I would have wasted 3 hours of your evening, and I would say so. That is not all. To the right of the girls, on the ground between the fence and the corner of the frame, in an area of open grass with nothing standing in it, there is a third shadow. It is small. It has been measured against the girls' shadows by two archivists and estimated, from the length ratio, as belonging to something between 32 and 36 inches tall. It is the shadow of a small child standing. There is nothing there to cast it. The grass in that part of the frame is sharp and unbroken and empty, and it is empty in plate 412 too. The same grass, minutes earlier, nothing on it. And the position of it, measured against the fence line and the corner of the house that is just inside the frame at the right edge, puts that shadow at approximately 9 paces from the kitchen door. 9 steps from the kitchen door. You know what was 9 steps from the kitchen door? He wrote it in his ledger, and his wife wrote it in a letter, and it is the same figure in both. The hand pump on the shallow well with the bad joint in the handle. On the 8th of August, 1892, at about 4 in the afternoon, a photographer from Zanesville, Ohio, who could not afterward remember doing it, exposed a plate for a length of time he never recorded of a spot in a farmyard in Braddock County, West Virginia, where nothing was standing, and a small child cast a shadow onto the grass beside the pump. 2 months before the twins were found, 16 months after Ruth Ann Nettle was buried in the churchyard at Stillwater Fork in a pair of soft-soled shoes with one button at the ankle. Now let me do the last honest thing I owe you, which is to tell you what I think, clearly labeled as what I think, so that you can throw it out if you want to. I said early on that Ottilie Craven asked Hester Nettle 3 questions in that 2-room house at the head of the hollow. When did you bury the least one? Did you have a likeness made of her? And has anybody made a likeness on that ground since? And when Hester said yes, a traveling man out of Ohio, 3 plates, the old woman said, "Then it is already outside the county, and there is nothing you nor I can do about that part of it, and it may be the best thing that ever happened here." For a long time I read that as an old woman saying something cryptic, because old women in stories say cryptic things. I do not read it that way anymore. Look at what that ground can do. It made a rectangle of swept forest floor, 100 feet on a side, and a man staked it and measured it and wrote it in a ledger. And 5 weeks later, there was brush grown up around his own stake so thick a man cut his hand on it. It grew a barn doorway 3/4 of an inch narrower. It put a ring of 9 locust posts on a bench above a branch, and a 14-year-old boy counted 206 tally marks on one of them, and 8 days later, a justice of the peace walked to that exact spot with the witness, and found brush that had not been cleared in years. That ground does not just copy, it edits. Everything in Nettle Hollow that anybody found was gone by the time anybody official came to look at it, every single time, And that is the whole of why nobody ever believed anybody about that place for 100 years, and why Orakello closed the file, and why the sensible reconstruction the girls ran off, somebody sheltered them, has stood since 1892. There was never anything to show, except that on the 8th of August, 1892, at about 4 in the afternoon, a stranger from Ohio drove up that grade with 60 pounds of chemistry in a wagon and pointed a lens at that yard and let light fall on a piece of glass for 8 seconds. And then he drove away with it. He took it out of the county. He took it to Parkersburg, and then to Zanesville, and then it went into a nephew's attic, and then into a historical society. And by the time anybody in Braddock County could have wanted it gone, it was 400 miles away, in a box with 400 other plates, and nobody on earth knew what was on it. It is the only piece of evidence in this entire case that left. Everything else stayed and was edited. The posts, the swept ground, the tracks in the yard, the prints from 1948 that went into a kitchen stove in Springfield, Ohio. Even the hollow itself is gone now, under 60 feet of water, which is either the last edit or a coincidence. And I know which one I would put money on at 2 in the morning, and which one I would defend in daylight. Ottilie Craven was 91 years old and had been keeping the account of a district for 63 years. And she understood, in 1892, before anybody had ever developed the plate, that a photograph made on thin ground and carried away from it was the one thing that ground could not reach. It may be the best thing that ever happened here. She was right. It is the only reason we know. And here is the last thing I have got, and then I will let you go. The Little Sang impoundment was closed in 1954. The pool covers about 1,100 acres, and the old settlement of Stillwater Fork, and the church, and the churchyard. The graves were moved in 1953, all of them by contract, and reinterred at a cemetery on higher ground near Ambler. And there is a list, and Ruth Ann Nettle died the 2nd of February, 1891, aged 1 year, 10 months, is on it. She was moved. I checked. I wanted very much to know that she had been moved. And the pool covers Nettle Hollow. But a flood control impoundment is not a lake. It is a machine, and it gets drawn down, and in dry years it gets drawn down a long way. In the autumn of 2002, there was a drought across that part of the state, and the pool fell about 41 feet below summer level, and a good deal of the old bottom came out of the water foundations, roadbeds, a bridge abutment, the stone footing of a church. The state sent a crew in to survey what was exposed, which is standard, because a drawdown is the only chance anybody gets to document what is down there. They walked the bed of Nettle Hollow on the 19th and 20th of October, 2002, and in the report, in a list of features recorded, with photographs, there is an entry that reads, in the flat language of a survey document, post ring, black locust, 9 posts, dia, approx 30 feet, central flat stone, posts extensively marked with incised tallies. Condition, submerged 48 wires, substantially intact. Recommend no further action. 9 posts, 30 feet across. A flat stone in the middle. Still standing after 48 years underwater, because black locust is what you use when you want a post to outlive you, and it will not rot, and it will sit in water for a century and be sound when you pull it out. The photographs are in the file. They are bad photographs. A state survey crew in 2002 with a point-and-shoot camera in flat overcast, and the posts are covered in dried silt, and on most of them you cannot make out the marks at all. But on one post, the third from the north, the silt had washed off one face, and the tallies are visible, and they run from about knee-height up as high as a man can comfortably reach, and I have looked at that photograph at every resolution the archive can give me, and I cannot count them, and neither could the crew, and the report does not attempt a number. What the report does note, and this is the last document I am going to read you tonight, and it is one sentence written by somebody with no idea what they were writing. Note: marks at upper right of this post appear considerably fresher than the remainder, showing light-colored wood, 3 in number. 3 fresh marks, pale wood, on a post that had been standing under 60 feet of water since 1954. I do not know what that means. I want to be extremely clear that I do not know what that means, and that wood exposed by a drought and dried by 2 weeks of October sun does strange things, and that a mark cut in 1870 will look newer if a chunk of silt has just come off it, and that I am reading a single ambiguous sentence in a routine survey report, and that this is exactly the sort of sentence that people like me build cathedrals on. 3 marks. Hester Nettle said the name twice. The pool came back up in the spring of 2003, and it has not gone that low since. So that is the case of the Nettle twins of Braddock County, West Virginia. 2 girls who went into a hollow on the 16th of October, 1892, and came out of it 9 days later holding hands, warm, dry, unmarked, and not hungry, standing in a creek, facing home, waiting for their mother to call them by name. And a mother who did not. That is what I keep coming back to, at the end of all of it. Not the plate, not the posts, not the shadow on the grass beside the pump. A woman stood on a porch in front of 30 people on the 25th of October, 1892, with both her daughters in front of her after 9 days of thinking they were dead, and every single thing in her body wanted to scream 2 names into that yard. And she said, "Come in the house." She gave up the sound of her children's names for the rest of her life so that she could keep her children. She never got them back the way they were. She could not tell them apart again from that day to the day she died. She could not say her youngest daughter's name at her own table in 11 years. She had 2 on the ledger, and she carried them for 9 more years, and then she went to bed one night with 1 lamp burning and did not wake up. I do not know if she saved anybody. I do not know whether both of the girls who walked down out of that hollow were her girls, and neither did she, and neither did they. And that is the actual shape of this thing. It does not kill you. It takes the one small certainty that everybody in the world has for free, that you know who is sitting at your table, and it removes it permanently, and then it leaves you alive to live the rest of your life without it. So let me ask you have you ever heard your own name in a voice you loved, in a place you knew that voice could not be? At 2 in the morning, from the other side of a door, from a hallway, from the bottom of a stairwell, in a house you thought was empty? And did you answer? Because I would like to know how many of you did, and I would like to know how many of you lay there with your mouth shut and your heart going and did not and could not have told anybody why, and have never told anybody until right now. Put it in the comments. I read every one of them. If you have a hollow of your own, a road, a house, a stretch of water, a room in a place that closed down, tell me where it is and what it did, and it may be the next one I take. If you want the rest of these, the collection is The Thin Ground 12 Cases, 10 Hours, linked in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. The next one I have got coming is out of Nicholas County, and it is about a man who kept a light burning in a window for 11 years for somebody who was never coming home, and about what finally came up the road to look at it. Until then, bar the door, keep 1 lamp, and if something starts counting with you, do not stop. Go all the way down.